Make sure you guys hit the subscribe button if you guys are enjoying the content that we're throwing up. And make sure you guys hit the like button if you enjoy the video. And yeah, let's begin. What's going on, guys? This is Rob, and we are getting into James Tynion's Batman run. And at the end of the video, we're going to talk about Punchline. A lot of you guys have been asking about her. We don't really have any information on her, right? But a lot of you guys have been asking, so I figured I would title this, Punchline, the Joker's new girlfriend. But she's had some scant appearances. And from what I understand, she's not really going to be a major player in Batman comics until we get to the Joker War. But you guys have been asking about her. You've been asking me to dump some information on her. So at the end of the video, I'll give you guys what we have. In any event, here's the thing about James Tynion's run, right? And this is one of the things to kind of be weary of when it comes to stories, right? James Tynion's Batman run is amazing so far, but so is Tom King's. And the issue is that by the time you got to the end of Tom King's run, it really kind of just seemed to be an exercise in self-indulgence with a great big huge story that really just didn't go anywhere. It's possible Tynion's run could go in that direction. We don't really know yet. But the cool thing about this is that Tynyon is writing Batman the way he's been writing Detective Comics, which is awesome because his run on Detective Comics is amazing. Like it's ridiculously good. I feel like it's one of the unsung heroes of like DC right now, right? Like it's a super good story. But what this does is it initially picks up seemingly with a kind of coming together of various villains, right? But the first person we really pick up here with is a character by the name of Cheshire. Now Cheshire is a long-standing enemy of the Teen Titans. The funny thing about Cheshire is she's unique and really in comparison to a lot of the different like mercenaries and villains who are out there, right? Because when you look at the people who are here, you have like Mr. Teeth, which we'll talk about him here in a little bit. You've got Malcolm Merlyn, kind of the antithesis of Green Arrow in the Green Arrow comics. You've got Gunsmith, who's actually a pretty cool character in and of himself. And then of course you have a fifth person here. We'll find out who they are here in a second. But Cheshire, among all the various contract killers out there, is unique because of the fact that basically her hair, her fingernails, things like that, are all tainted with different poisons, right? So like at any point in time, she could scratch you and you could die from like the venom of an asp snake, or in this instance where she killed the doorman, the venom of what was basically a box jellyfish. Like these things are cool, right? It's one of the things that makes her really intriguing and really interesting, but it makes her difficult to capture, right? Because she's like a tree frog, right? Like an Amazonian tree frog. The entirety of her body is basically a giant poison. And so if you were to touch her, you were to grab her hair, or you were to be scratched by her nails, or bit by her, or something like that, or even possibly touch her skin, you could die. And so it's interesting. Like she's really intriguing in that way. But what this also does is it kind of switches over to Catwoman. Now, here's one of the cool things here, right, with Selina Kyle. This is one of the things that I love about what Tynyon's doing that Tom King did differently. Whenever Tom King had like Batman and Catwoman talking, it just didn't sound natural, right? It was like watching an Alan Sorkin show, right? So like The Newsroom or like The West Wing, where people have conversations, but no one really talks like that in real life. And it kind of removed you from the comic, right? Like nobody talks that way, like when they would communicate and things like that. Tynyon does a really, really good job of having discussions between characters, and it really just kind of feels organic, the way that Selina Kyle and Batwoman talk. It's not the most important thing out there, but it is kind of a cool thing. The other part of this that you really end up learning here is that Bruce Wayne is kind of going, or at least Batman's going headlong into the notion of like developing Gotham City, right? He's going into the notion of like developing Gotham and just making it a better place, as opposed to I'm running around as Batman and I'm beating up criminals in the middle of the night like I'm some kind of a schizophrenic, and that's my shtick, that's my thing, right? Like he's actually working to improve Gotham more so than he ever did before. And in fact, Tynyon will kind of address this unlike years past. But the cool thing is that what he ends up doing is really kind of having this conversation with Lucius Fox, right? Where Batman is in the midst of developing this, not really a Batmobile, but not really a Batwing, kind of a blend between the two to a degree, which is somewhat of an interesting idea. But the big takeaway from this is he basically says that about 5 days prior on the dark web, that the Batcomputer picked up a message that was sent out and then deleted 3 minutes later. And what this basically did was kind of send out a message to 5 of the most capable assassins out there in the world, and basically said, meet in Gotham City on this day and we're going to complete a mission. And that basically Deathstroke is the one who's leading them. And this is an interesting thing here because Batman really sort of analyzes all the villains who were there, and it's just kind of like, okay, each one of these guys are interesting, Mr. Teeth and Gunsmith and Cheshire and so on. But the only person that I'm really worried about here is Deathstroke, because for Deathstroke, it's about the money, but also about the principle. If somebody's going to hire him for a job, it has to be worth doing, right? Because Deathstroke has enough money. So it's one of these things where he doesn't really need the cash. Is it worth my while to even take this job job in the first place, which he can kind of command, right? He's like the premier assassin in DC Comics. So like if you really want somebody to die, Deathstroke's the guy you get a hold of. So it's kind of interesting. And so because of this, Batman's essentially planned for a lot of these villains to take them down, but also realizes that Deathstroke's mind operating as fast as it does, and in fact, this kind of established here 9 times faster than the average man, means that Batman has to act and then respond in really an exceedingly short amount of time. Otherwise, Deathstroke will mentally get the upper hand. And this is an important thing because what it shows here is that while Bruce Wayne doesn't really consider Deathstroke to be an equal, he does consider Deathstroke to be somebody worth worrying about. And Deathstroke is in a lot of ways an equal to Batman, not, strictly in terms of fighting, but in terms of his ingenuity, how his mind works, his ability to comprehend and understand situations, to get in and out of different scenarios as fast as possible. I mean, for God's sake, the guy was facing off against Superman and just threw like glowing green rocks at him and tricked Superman into thinking it was kryptonite, right? So like small little things like that are what really make Deathstroke unique and intriguing here. And so of course, Batman executes this plan and basically, throws out what are called the Bat Shadow Casters. And what these are designed to do is basically kind of emit a shadow that more or less follows these various villains around and then tricks them into believing they're leading Batman into a trap, right? Where they can somehow take him out, when in reality, he's not there. Now, of course, going toe-to-toe against Deathstroke is a cool thing to see. With Deathstroke being there, him and Batman facing off against each other, it's largely been established multiple times over DC Comics that sometimes the battle can actually go either way. That sometimes Deathstroke can win because of his super soldier enhancements. Sometimes Batman can win because Batman's just the best fighter in DC Comics. But regardless, basically what Deathstroke says here is, like, you fighting me, this is the distraction. This is part of the big plan, right? Like, this is all going the way it's supposed to. And Batman's response is, I know exactly what's going on. Like, I know what it is that you're trying to do. And that's what we basically pick up with Catwoman, who followed a guy down into this kind of sub-basement with all this information, where the plans of Bruce Wayne in fixing Gotham City and kind of what it is that he wants to do with the city as a whole are intending to be replaced with a new set of designs by a person called the Designer. And the cool thing about this is that when this happens, when this goes down and Catwoman confronts this guy, ultimately he's just kind of like, you have to stop this guy. Like, I don't care what you have to do, but you have to stop this guy's plans from coming to fruition, after which this guy immediately begins to die, kind of breaking down and so on. But a disembodied voice seemingly starts to kind of come out of this guy's body and basically saying, like, Catwoman, I see you, I know you're here. You have to understand this plan that was concocted some time ago that you were a part of, it's now coming to fruition, right? The Designer is coming for Gotham City. And Catwoman immediately picks up on what's going on. And so what this does is it hits back to this idea that somewhere along the line, in part of the history of Gotham City, which we haven't really known about before, that Catwoman seemingly made a deal or made some kind of a bargain with this Designer guy, but we don't really know how far this goes, right? Just kind of hitting at this idea that there's some pretty clandestine stuff going on. But the cool thing about this is that this rabbit hole goes down pretty far, and we'll find out how far it goes. But what this does is it jumps to Batman, who basically jumps on his communicator and says, Alfred, send a priority signal to the Gotham City Police Department. And this is cool because my initial thought was, oh my God, Gotham's back. But it's interesting to see Tynion kind of picking up on what it is that Tom King did and continuing that continuity, because Alfred's dead. And that's where Lucius chimes in and says, Alfred isn't here anymore, man. Like, Alfred's gone, Batman. And Batman slipped, right? He knew that Alfred was gone, but it was just one of these things where he's so used to doing it. It's crushing for him to have to admit that Alfred's not here. And he actually just kind of, seems to cry. I mean, some of it seems like rain, but I would say Batman kind of seems to cry in response to this. And so as a result, he basically tells Lucius, grab that ship thing, we'll grab the villains and we'll take them off, and that'll basically be the end of that. And so what you basically end up doing is you end up jumping to Riddler, who's having a conversation with the Penguin. Of course, the Penguin killing various people who were there. And this is when things get cool, because what the Riddler says is, I've been watching everything that's been going on with Gotham City. I've been watching all these things take place, so on and so forth. And like the Designer is coming to town, right? The Designer is here in Gotham City. The response of Penguin is, yeah, I know. And I've taken out anybody who knows what it is that I've been doing, right? Who knows about my plans or anything like that. Literally, all the villains are basically cleaning house. Whoever this Designer is, whoever this guy is here, whatever it is he's capable of and whatever he's about, is scaring the hell out of the villains, right? It's scaring them enough to where Penguin is killing off his henchmen, so there's no one there to drop any information, and the Riddler's scared out of his wits, right? The Riddler's just like, dude, this guy is no joke. And so it's kind of crazy because, we've seen things with like Bane taking over Gotham City, so on and so forth. The difference between this, the way this is going down and what Tom King did is that in this story, you feel the stakes. You're like, okay, so like something's getting ready to pop off in Gotham. Something really bad is getting ready to happen. But that's the thing is the Riddler's response is like, the Designer is coming to collect. The Designer is coming for all of us as the villains. And Penguin's response is, he can try. And so this is when when things get interesting, because from there, you pick up with the various villains, of course, who have essentially been apprehended by Batman. And what you learn is you have this place called the Black Block. And the Black Block is basically this prison that's designed to hold people that are escape dangers. Now, the reason why this is awesome, and this is an amazing invention by James Tynion, because I'm pretty sure he's the one who made it. When you look at the Batman mythos and you look at like Arkham Asylum, Arkham is for the most part a revolving door, right? Like Two-Face or Penguin or Joker or any number of those guys, Riddler, Mad Hatter, whoever, you know, the Mr. Freeze, they're busted by Batman, and then it's only a matter of time before they escape from Arkham. In order to avoid this, what Batman had done, working alongside Lucius Fox and really even the Gotham City Police Department, was create the Black Block as a place where escaping criminals, right? So like Bane and Joker, people like that who present a clear and present danger to Gotham City itself, could be held and detained. But you basically got 10 feet of cement, which is lined with concrete. The idea is that like no one can get out of here, right? Like once you're in, you're in. And there's only two ways in and out of this whole Black Block. The first one is basically a DNA encoded set of keys that are only used by Gotham City Police Department. And the second one is an entrance that only Batman knows about. And so when Batman gets in there and starts talking to Deathstroke, Deathstroke is immediately like, hey man, like, you know, I'm not going to tell you who it was that hired me, so don't waste your time. The other people don't know, so they can't tell you. But here's the thing. One, I'm going to break out of here, right? Like, I'm not going to be in here forever. This is a cool little game you're playing, and I like that you believe you can hold me. It's cute, but understand, I'm Deathstroke, right? Like, I will get out of this place. And then two, this is a game that you're playing. It's interesting to watch you play this game because you're going to lose, and it's going to be fun to watch you fail. But this is a game that you will not win. So wish me luck when I get out of here. And that's when Batman basically tells Bullock, who's basically operating as a commissioner, presumably because of the events of the Batman Who Laughs and the fact that Commissioner Gordon is basically there with the Batman Who Laughs as part of his, you know, evil group or whatever, his evil Justice League. Who cares? Nobody's reading that anymore. The thing is that, like, when he basically has the cell of Cheshire opened up, Batman rubs her face and then realizes that it's Clay, that it's a body double, right? Like, it's not actually Cheshire herself. And so immediately goes on the defensive with Lucius, says, find Cheshire, track her down. They successfully do. They end up locating her. And then one of the most crazy things to come out of this, in this Batwing, you know, ship thing that Bruce Wayne has, he shoots himself out of the railgun. He literally shoots himself out of the railgun in order to track her down as fast as possible, because of the fact that the buildings she's traveling between are too narrow for him to just like swoop down and pick her up with like some kind of a chain and then do like he did in Detective Comics number 27, where he just hangs her and there's just like, she's better off this way. But nonetheless, you know, jumping out of here, or at least when Cheshire makes her move to try to take out Bruce Wayne, and then immediately goes to basically dig her nails into his skin, that the intention is that he's going to end up dying from whatever poison he's exposed to. Now, of course, this leads to basically Cheshire being hit by a truck while Batman slides underneath it. And while it's not enough to kill her, it is enough to incapacitate her. And then, of course, Batman reveals that he basically had a kind of membrane in his suit that essentially absorbed the poison. So, you know, Batman's plot armor strikes again. But then at that moment, suddenly Deathstroke and all of his guys escape from the facility. And that's when we basically end up finding out here that what was going on is that Penguin basically made his move, right? Penguin had jumped in here, and Penguin was the one who freed all of these guys. He's the one that got them all out of there, which is kind of a cool thing to see. And so then what you do is you basically jump to the Riddler having a conversation with Catwoman. The Catwoman's basically made her way to a cemetery after that, you know, conversation with the one guy who she believed to have been dead, ends up having a conversation with her and basically saying, hey, I haven't used this line for quite some time, but you have to understand, we all made a deal with the designer. We made a deal with him, and he's coming to collect. So you, me, anybody who was involved with that, we're all either going to die or we're going to have to play ball. The indication is that the designer is going to kill them all, right? That's the indication. He's going to kill all the villains of Batman. That's why this is so cool, right? Because the stakes feel so intense, right? It's just like, dude, all the villains of Batman are going to die. And it sucks, especially for Catwoman, because she's a good guy now. And it's one of the things that's really kind of communicated here when it comes to Riddler, is he says, the whole reason why we got together with the designer was to commit, quote unquote, the perfect crime. But basically, you know, house is being cleaned by all of us. Me as the Riddler, I never really had henchmen, so I don't really have to worry about that. I'm basically gonna, like, I'm getting out of here, like I'm jumping ship. The Penguin cleaned house on his end. We have to assume that if there are any other villains that are involved, they've done the exact same thing as well. But the belief of Catwoman is that the Joker's somehow involved here. And so, of course, traveling to the cemetery, this is done for the intention of finding the casket of the Joker, which she does. He's basically laying down inside this casket. Now, for those of you guys who are unsure, or who are kind of looking at this, like, when did the Joker die? This basically appeared to have happened back in Batman issue number 49 by Tom King as part of the lead up to the wedding that never happened between Batman and Catwoman. Catwoman. And there was kind of like this Killing Joke moment, right? Where Catwoman and Joker got into a fight, and then she slashed his throat with her claws. And then they had this great big huge long, conversation basically, which Tom King did with unnecessarily with a lot of situations. But basically at the end of it, Joker seemingly died, right? He's just kind of seemed to have been dead ever since. Now, continuity wise, I don't know how that fits into Doomsday Clock. I don't think DC knows. I don't think they really care enough to figure it all out. But the long and short of it is that at the moment right now, all indications are that the Joker's dead, right? So the question becomes, if the Joker's dead, then how is his disembodied voice communicating with anybody who's out there, right? Or seemingly communicating with her, at least as Catwoman believed. And so the other part of this is, of course, Batman, essentially apprehending Cheshire, is then contacted by Lucius Fox, who gives him one of the coolest inventions ever. What he basically says is that inside of your utility belt is a device called the Echo. And what the Echo does is it basically allows you to attach it to any vehicle that's out there, which in turn will hack into the Wayne Enterprises components within the car, and then basically allow the car's appearance to change. It creates a kind of hologram, but it'll make any car look like a Batmobile, and then it'll allow it to drive as fast as the Batmobile, which is cool, because basically what this means is that Batman's got a Batmobile in his pocket, right? Like at any point in time, he can just slap this thing onto a car and then drive off. Now, Batman's response is like, you want me to jack a car and then turn it into a Batmobile and then drive? And Lucius is like, well, it's my car, so you're fine. But nonetheless, the funny thing is that, kind of switching back to Catwoman, in the midst of this whole thing where she kind of comes to frustration with the fact that, one, the Riddler basically says, I'm cutting this line now, I'm leaving. There'll be no more communication between you and me. Good luck with the designer. Hopefully you get out in time, but understand that you're probably going to have to break this news to Batman, something that, it's this kind of ultimate betrayal, more or less, that you committed against him without him really knowing. She's also met with the arrival of these two kind of henchmen of sorts, who basically show up and then essentially, almost kind of knock her out or knock her unconscious, and then start burying her there along with the Joker, and so of course, picking up with the Penguin, the Penguin basically there with Deathstroke and all those guys is kind of like, look, like, here's the deal. I'm skipping town, right? Like, I'm getting out of here. I don't want to have anything to do with the designer. I know the designer was the one that hired you guys. I will pay you double your rate if you guys leave Gotham, and then you guys sign a non-compete clause. Basically, you won't return to Gotham within a calendar year. And the response to Deathstroke is, you couldn't afford my price, right? So you can't even afford double my price. And then in turn, intends to go and kill the Penguin, only for Batman to basically show up. And then of course, he's kind of told, hey man, just so you know, like, attaching the Echo to any car does not give you the kind of armor that the Batmobile has. So just keep that in mind, man. It's just a hologram, right? So if they shoot you, you're probably gonna die if you get shot in like the jaw or something like that, somewhere where your armor doesn't protect you. But for the most part, the various henchmen who are here are overtaken like that, right? I mean, they're for the most part taken out quick, fast, and in a hurry by Batman, at which point the, Deathstroke responds, stop. Like, if you keep fighting, I'm gonna kill the Penguin. And so it's cool because Malcolm Merlyn grabs Cheshire, the villains make their escape, and Deathstroke slices the throat of the Penguin. And it's, dude, like, when this happened, I was like, holy cow, dude, like, dude, is the Penguin gonna die? The classic villains of Batman are basically being killed off, so of course this leads to Deathstroke making the smart move. It's the smartest move for him to make, right? Knowing Batman as he knows him, he knows that Batman will not let the Penguin die, right? Batman, despite all the glitz and glamour and all the stuff that he does, is a champion of life, right? So he's not going to let the Penguin die. And so Deathstroke knows this, and he essentially says, you have one of two choices. Either you can come after us and you can let the Penguin die, or you can save Penguin. But we know you're not going to let him die. We know how this game's going to play out. We'll see you when we see you. We're going to go after our targets. And basically they end up leaving while Batman goes to save Penguin himself. And so with that going down, the Penguin in turn spills the beans and basically says, years ago, right? You never knew about this. Nobody ever told you, but years ago, myself, Joker, Catwoman, like Riddler, the underworld essentially united to commit the perfect crime. And the perfect crime was to take out Bruce Wayne, right? To ally ourselves with the designer, and the designer's goal was to take out Bruce Wayne. That these guys here, right? These, Deathstroke and all those guys, they're there to take out false targets. The way this looks like it was supposed to go down is that Batman was not supposed to know what was actually going on, that instead you'd have these criminals who showed up here, they would take out false targets, Batman would chase around, try to figure out what's going on, and the designer instead would basically take out the plans of Bruce Wayne to destroy what it is that he wanted to do with Gotham City itself. The other indication here is that if the designer is looking to take out Bruce Wayne, that would seem arbitrary, right? Like, I mean, he's just a really rich guy as far as the world's concerned. All anybody, aside from the Justice League and the individuals who know that Bruce Bruce Wayne is Batman, Bruce Wayne is just a really rich guy who's trying to make Gotham better, seemingly. The indication here is the designer knows that Bruce Wayne is Batman. Like that kind of seems to be what the case is. Now, there, it's cool to see that, because then you switch over, of course, to Catwoman, and Catwoman basically kind of digs herself out. She's like, I'm not gonna die here. Like, I'm not gonna die buried alive in a grave with the Joker's corpse. Like, that's ridiculous. She kind of ends up jumping out, and then, of course, is saved by none other than Harley Quinn, which is kind of crazy, because it's like, why in the heck is Harley Quinn even here? Which is kind of nuts. Now, of course, from there, the Penguin is basically dropped off at like a Gotham City hospital by Batman. Literally, Batman grabbed the Penguin, drove to this location out of the vehicle, left him on the steps of the hospital, and was like, I got stuff to do, and then left. Which is kind of screwed up. But Batman ends up going after these false targets, right? Now, this is important, because what this shows is Batman is trying to do it all, right? Now, the reality is Batman wouldn't let the false targets die, right? That was the whole message of the Penguin. Gunsmith and Mr. Teeth and Cheshire and Deathstroke, so on. They're going to go after the false targets, and they're going to kill them, right? So innocent people are basically going to die if Batman chose not to go after these guys. And that's kind of the danger of all this, right? Like, the designer really seems to be orchestrating things in such a way to where Batman's being pushed to his limits. And in a lot of ways he is, because this comes hot off the heels of everything that just happened with City of Bane, the death of Alfred, and all that kind of stuff, right? And so kind of going after the gunsmith, we sort of get a rundown on this guy. This guy's name is Douglas Worth. And basically he was a veteran, of half a dozen military contractors, as is explained by James Tynion, and then ultimately was fired from each and every one for using experimental weapons in the field without any kind of approval whatsoever. But the reason why he got his name is that basically he kind of fashioned a silencer out of different things that he found from an electronics store, and then killed a guy on a plane that was full of people, and no one knew that he did it, right? So he was just that capable. But the issue is that at the end of the day, despite his capabilities with fashioning weapons seemingly out of just arbitrary components, kind of being like this MacGyver sort of situation, he's no match for Batman, right? So he's taken out with a quickness, right? I mean, that happens quick, fast, and in a hurry. Following that is Mr. Teeth, and Mr. Teeth sort of gained his name because of the fact that what he was doing was going through and killing people, and then surgically removing the teeth from their mouth, and then surgically putting them inside their stomachs, right? Now, why he was doing that, we don't know. Probably because he's just crazy as hell. But of course, he's taken out by Batman as well with a quickness, right? The other thing behind this is that they're currently, he's currently in the lair of the Riddler. And so the indication seems to be here that these 5 guys were basically tasked with tracking down the classic villains of Batman: Catwoman, the Riddler, Penguin, presumably Two-Face, the Joker, these major members of the criminal underworld. They're each going to take out one of them. And of course, Mr. Teeth was here to take out the Riddler. And so with Mr. Teeth being removed from the equation, this in turn allows Batman to basically analyze the only real footage left there by Riddler by Edward Nygma, which was done, of course, intentionally for Batman to follow up on. And it's cool to see that James Tynion does this, right? It's cool to see him look at this and say, okay, let's still maintain this role of the Riddler. What Edward Nygma was doing is that when he was confronted by the designer, he was making a series of hand gestures. And these hand gestures were essentially, a riddle, more or less. So on a keyboard of sorts, they were more or less a riddle. And Batman understanding and deciphering this, picking up this riddle is basically the question: what walks on 4 legs in the morning, 2 legs in midday, and 3 legs in the evening? And the response to Lucian Fox is, well, man, I have no idea how that makes sense. But of course, Batman figuring it out basically says, okay, this essentially grants them access to the computer systems, which basically shows them that the Riddler was running a track that nobody else was, right? That Batman wasn't or anybody else wasn't, which was on Deathstroke. And so that, of course, gives them the location of Deathstroke, which Batman, sends out his little bat drones in order to track him down. But what this does is that from here, it switches directly over to Batman and to Catwoman, Catwoman and Harley Quinn showing up. And then Catwoman basically saying, like, we need to talk, like, we need to have a conversation. I need to tell you about all of these things. That it's a guy called the Designer, that he's basically here. Now, Batman, for the most part, knows what the Penguin told him, but he doesn't really know everything. And so it's at this point when Catwoman apologizes that we get into essentially the new girlfriend of the Joker. A lot of you guys have been asking about this. A lot of you guys have been asking me questions. What's going on with the girlfriend of the Joker? This is all we have, right? This is it. It's basically just a girl who calls the Joker and is just like, hey, they've seen the grave, but their attention's been drawn elsewhere. And the Joker's response is, okay, like, I have something else to attend to, right? Like, I have other people to talk to before this goes down. This is it, guys. Like, this is all we have with the girlfriend of the Joker. I don't really understand why people are freaking out over it. I get it insofar as it's the Joker's new girlfriend, but aside from this and like an appearance in Hell Arisen, there's nothing else here, right? Like, she's not going to be a major player until April or May when it comes to Joker War. All we're going to get is these little teaser 1-page moments, and that's basically going to be it, right? So this is kind of strange to me, in terms of people getting super hyped up and everybody asking me about it, right? It's like people who are asking me to explain the One Below All on Marvel Comics. We don't know enough. We can't explain it because we don't know enough, and we don't don't really know anything about her. All we know is that she's just a character who's there, and that's basically it. But the big takeaway from all this is the Joker is alive, right? The Joker's very much alive. We don't really know how, but the Joker is very much alive. Maybe he's one of the 3 mysterious Jokers, and that's essentially it. But what's going on, guys? This is Rob, and we are picking back up again with Batman. And I know it's been a little while since we covered this. It's been quite some time since we covered the Batman comics, right? But like, we need to get caught up, right? Because there's some cool stuff coming down the pipe. So for those of you guys who are playing catch up, of course, you'll find the link to the previous video down in the description, so you can watch that and find out everything that's going on. But effectively what's happening here is James Tynion kind of kicked things off with his run on Batman following Tom King, and he introduced a character called the Designer. And we didn't really know anything about him, right? And there's been several videos across YouTube that have focused on the origin of the character, but the Designer was basically a guy who seemingly went to a handful of criminals in Gotham City and then basically said, like, I will help you guys achieve the goal of effectively taking the city over for yourself. And this seemed to happen a number of years ago. And so the implication was that a lot of the schemes and things that were going on in the city of Gotham with regards to the criminals were all based on the efforts of the Designer himself. And what this basically did is it led to the idea that the Designer seems to have returned, and Batman is kind of caught up in this whole thing. Again, it's kind of interesting because it invokes like Deathstroke, and it invokes a few other characters here and there, but we basically left off with the idea that Deathstroke's assassins, more or less, his henchmen, for lack of a better word, had basically been taken, and then you end up picking up with Harley Quinn, who's basically controlling a bunch of these weapons belonging to Batman and is sending them after Deathstroke, right? So this part of the story kind of kicks off, it picks up with a bang, and it's kind of a cool thing because what it does is it switches back over to Catwoman and to Bruce Wayne. Now, one of the things that James Tynion kept going after the events of Tom King was the relationship between Catwoman and Bruce Wayne, and a lot of people really liked this, right? It just kind of made sense. One of the things that always kind of threw me off about Tom King's writing was the way that Batman and Catwoman talk to each other. Just never really seemed organic. James Tynion really seems to correct that, right? Tom King's writing was a little weird, but James Tynion really seems to correct that and basically giving us this seemingly organic conversation between the two. But because of the fact that Catwoman was one of the initial individuals who dealt with the Designer, she's the one that basically has all this information. And the response of Batman is, I need you to tell me everything that's going on. And so what this does is it gives us a kind of flashback with the origin of the Designer himself, insofar as it's given to us here. And what we basically learn is that at some point in the past, seemingly around 20 years ago, seems to be the indication that Catwoman was basically just a kind of burglar, right? She was in the early days of her career, but there was a kind of legend of a guy named the Designer, this individual out there that was responsible for pulling off some of the greatest heists that ever happened. It's cool here because he was almost kind of like this mythical, enigmatic figure, right? He existed, but it's one of these things where people were just kind of like, this guy's more myth than actual fact. And so what ended up happening is that there was basically a card sent to Catwoman that was essentially an invitation from the Designer to meet at a particular location. When she arrives there, she's met by the Riddler, she's met by Joker, and she's met by Penguin, all of whom have been invited as well. And they're seemingly brought in by this guy on a boat, which is kind of creepy in terms of how he looks. It's almost like crossing the river Styx, right? Where like you have to pay the coins to the guy on the boat. I don't remember what his name is. He has an actual name in Greek and Roman theology, but nonetheless, they're basically brought to this house, right? It's called the House of Tartarus, where they meet with the Designer for the very first time. And it's kind of nuts here because the Designer sort of pops up and really says, like, when he's talking to the Joker, he's like, you're the clown prince of crime, like your reputation precedes you. The indication here is that the Designer knows everything about these guys. Now, when they are brought here, their weapons are basically handed over to make sure that nothing pops off, but it's kind of a cool thing. The other cool thing about this is the Designer looks amazing, right? In terms of his design, he looks absolutely awesome. But it's kind of a cool thing because what we also end up learning is that with this guy here, with the Designer, in his past, he had basically come across a kind of detective. And there is more to the story, but we'll figure out, what that is later on down the line. But this Designer had basically faced off against this detective and ultimately found what we basically see with Batman comics all the time, that the villain fights the good guy and the good guy always wins because the good guy's always 1 or 2 steps ahead. The Designer kind of found himself in this constant struggle of always losing because the detective he was fighting was just that much more intelligent than he was. And he came to the realization that in order to win, he has to outthink the detective. More so than that, it can't just be a plan the detective doesn't expect. He has to be so far ahead that by the time the detective realizes there's no chance for him to win, he's already lost. And ultimately, the Designer ended up spending a year inside of his own facility, right? His own kind of base of operations, for lack of a better word, and just kept coming up with all these ideas and all these plans that were so advanced and so nuanced, the detective never saw them coming. And the only real indication we get here is that the detective was not actually killed by the designer. Instead, he was left essentially disgraced, right? He was left disgraced, and for the most part, the world seems to have lost faith in him, and ultimately he just ended up dying, seemingly of old age, but just ended up dying, realizing that he was defeated by what seemed to be either his greatest foe or any one of the many foes that he faced off against. But the designer proved to be successful in that regard. And so what it does is it basically allows the designer to tell the various people, these various villains, this story, and then say, I can help all of you achieve your goal. Now, it's interesting the way that Tynion writes this, because the villains really just kind of seem to go along with it, right? I mean, the reputation of the designer really seems to kind of solidify that he's a guy that deserves to be believed, but there's no guarantee that his reputation is really accurate outside of the various rumors and hearsay that the villains have heard. And so we're just kind of left to assume that the designer is actually correct, right? He can do this stuff because his reputation is such that the individuals who are telling the story are beyond contestation as far as these various villains are concerned. But it is a pretty cool concept here. And so with Catwoman and with the Riddler and with Penguin meeting with the designer in turn, they all kind of come out really a lot happier than they were going in, because there seems to be truth to the idea that the designer can help them achieve their goals. Now, the whole reason behind this is the designer can get rich, right? He's like, I'm going to help all of you achieve your goals, but I want half of all your earnings, right? I want half of everything you take, and then we'll just, you'll never hear from me again. And so finally, the designer meets with the Joker. And as we know, the Joker is really kind of a wild card. You never really know what's going to happen. And so somehow we don't really know what was said, but the result was that when the Joker had his conversation with the designer immediately comes out and it's just like, kill them all. So whatever the Joker said pissed this guy off nice and good. Not only that, with everything popping off, right? Like all these forces of the designer coming after all the various villains who were here, the Joker ends up revealing that he still has a gun that he kept hidden, and he shoots the designer in the head, and that seems to be the end of him. Not only that, the various henchmen of the designer are taken out. The Joker seemingly killed everybody here. It is kind of nuts, because it's like, what in the world could the Joker have possibly said to this guy that would have led to this becoming what it was? Not only that, you also end up having the villains here saying, okay, then we're going to sweep this under the rug. This is going to be our dirty little secret. And that's kind of the secret they were referencing in the video that we did last time, right? They all kind of share this mutual secret. We didn't really know how deep it went, but basically the designer was the guy who was going to help them achieve their goals. None of their goals could be achieved without the funding of the designer, which really seemed to be kind of the plan, right? Like, I'll tell you how you can achieve your goal, but it's all for naught if you don't have the financial backing to do it, right? The money to be able to pull it off. And so they have these plans with no means to achieve them. And so they end up kind of sweeping the whole thing under the rug. But for the Joker himself, where they burn Tartarus House and just kind of leave it there, the Joker is kind of staring off at the distance. And that's when Catwoman comments that she began to realize how evil the Joker is going to become, because the Joker basically knows what his plan is. He knows what he can do. And the Joker could essentially find a way to bypass the finances needed by the designer and then in turn pull it off on his own anyway. Not only that, when Catwoman finishes this conversation with Batman, Batman comes to the realization that the plan of Catwoman was to basically rob him. Her plan was to rob Bruce Wayne. And so if the designer could help her achieve that goal, then the designer knew that Batman is Bruce Wayne. Not only that, the designer knows how to access his family's wealth, meaning Batman could seemingly lose everything. And so what it does is it switches over to the Joker, basically in the modern day, talking to a bartender, essentially drinking what looks like a margarita. But he kind of starts telling the story from his perspective and basically says that during this meeting they had with the designer, that the designer basically said, I can help you guys achieve these various goals, right? And so ultimately he said, like, each of you guys will get a boon. You'll basically get some kind of financial backing, so on and so forth. And so ultimately the Penguin wanted to be king of Gotham City, right? He wanted to be the mayor. He wanted to be the one to run the show. The Riddler wanted to be the smartest person in Gotham City, and Catwoman wanted to be the wealthiest. But with Joker sitting down and looking at this and realizing that there would be no room for the designer in Gotham City itself, the Joker came to the realization that what the designer intended to do was help them achieve their goals, and then with nobody else there, take them all out, and then seemingly be the only one to conquer Gotham City. Or the indication is that Joker was the one who wanted to do that. But basically what he told the designer is, if you're the devil, then I want to take your place. I want to kill you, and I want to be the one to conquer Gotham City. And that seems to have been the reason why the designer kind of freaked out, because the Joker was the one that seemed to pick up on what it was that was actually happening. Again, this is Joker, and the way he tells his stories are oftentimes ambiguous in the sense that we don't know if they're ever true. We don't know if he's ever really telling the truth. But again, what it does is it basically picks up with Deathstroke and Batman on, Batman hot on his trail. The fact that Harley Quinn is basically kind of blowing through all the various devices of Batman, and Batman ends up chiming into Lucius Fox and saying, like, shut down her control of these things. She's basically spending money like water through a sieve. That's not okay. That's the problem. Bruce Wayne ultimately manages to track down Deathstroke, and of course he ends up taking him captive, or at least, Deathstroke jumps onto the Batwing and then just starts like attacking it and so on and so forth. One thing that does happen here is Catwoman ends up locating Harley Quinn, and then the two of them basically leave for track down the designer or something along those lines. They're met by a couple of Jokerized members from the Gotham City Police Department. This kind of seems to be partially a scheme of the Joker. We're not entirely sure here, but what it does is it allows a kind of battle between Batman and Deathstroke. Now, the reality is that this has kind of been done to death, right? Batman versus Deathstroke. But what makes this interesting is the conversation between the two, because what you end up having here is Deathstroke and Batman really having this conversation where Batman kind of looks around and says, like, down there in Gotham City, there's 9 million people. And ironically enough, their faith in their government actually went up when Bane took control. It's one of these interesting things. We talked about that in the City of Bane story arc. Like, people would say, God, you know, it's terrible that Bane took over Gotham and all that kind of stuff. But at the end, according to the people there, he made the city a better place. That Batman's not really willing to do what it takes in order to actually win this battle. That's the interesting thing about the Batman mythos, is I hear people kind of create these arguments all the time of like, well, if that were the logic, then like Superman should kill his villains and Spider-Man should kill his villains and so on and so forth. But Batman categorically and unequivocally has the worst, most violent rogues gallery in all of comic books. And that's why there's a legitimate case to make there in saying that Batman should kill all his villains, right? Because the city of Gotham would be better off with all those various villains dead. It's cool because Batman kind of looks at this and says, yeah, like this city is the way it is because of me. And it's one of these things where he almost kind of tries to play it based on like, well, you know, I mean, my parents died when I was a little kid. They were shot in an alley and I had to go down this path and all this kind of stuff. And Deathstroke's not buying it. He's like, at the end of the day, man, you can come to me with whatever story you want to, but you escalated. We were criminals doing criminal things. You're the one who donned a cloak and cowl, and then you're the one that started taking us out the way that you did. We had to step up because you stepped up. You're sort of left asking the question, right? If Bruce Wayne becoming Batman is what led to criminals becoming more violent, then is Batman really the reason why Gotham is the way it is? Were criminals ever going to become that violent in the first place, or did they only ever really get that way because of Batman? It's interesting to look at it for the other, you know, from the other side of the equation. And so Batman tries to reason with Deathstroke and it's like, look, I'm trying to change the fact that I've gotten extreme in recent years, because he has. Batman's become more and more extreme as comics have gone on. You look at like Silver Age Batman, and then you compare him to like Batman from like Infinite Crisis, Final Crisis, the New 52. Batman's gotten more and more extreme over the years, because remember, it's all just one cohesive continuity now, right? So Batman has gotten more extreme over the years, and where he's like, I'm trying to change this extreme nature, but what I need you guys to do is to basically slow down and stop. The response to Deathstroke is, no, that's not going to happen, right? Like, we're not going to slow down, we're not going to stop. And so Batman basically like just lunges at him and sends the both of them flying off the Batwing. And ultimately, Deathstroke calls his bluff, right? He's like, look, man, you can do this all day long if you want to, but we both know you're going to shoot one of your bat grappling guns, right? So just do that, do the damn thing, and then save us, right? And that's exactly what he does, right? He shoots a grappling hook and basically ends up saving him and Deathstroke, and that's essentially it. And it's kind of a funny thing, because Deathstroke can essentially play Batman like a fiddle. Batman's predictable. There's just a line that Batman won't cross. And because the villains know Batman won't cross that line, at the end of the day, he's always only ever a half measure, because it's kind of like, I won't do what needs to be done in order to save Gotham City because I don't believe in killing, right? My parents were killed and, you know, yada, 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 and so on and so forth. But sometimes it's in the best interest to kill a villain, right? It's in the interest of people. By Batman not killing his villains, all he's doing is sacrificing innocent lives, right? He's saying like the thousands of people that Joker's going to kill over the course of a year or several years or something like that, they are not as valuable as the Joker's life, right? The Joker being redeemed is more valuable than those innocent people. And that's why it's always an interesting question. How many lives is Batman willing to sacrifice before he says enough is enough? Because in the end, if he has the means to kill the Joker, but he doesn't, he is in effect sacrificing those people's lives. And so where the designer finally pops up to Batman and basically says, you know, Deathstroke, you're done now, indicating to Deathstroke that he's going to get screwed over on his contract, Batman's kind of like, you know, come and face me. And the response to the designer is, no, we still have one more game left. And that's when Edward Nygma, the Riddler, pops up and says, the entirety of Gotham City is now under my control. I've split the entire city into what's basically a giant crossword puzzle. And there's these enormous walls as tall as buildings, you know, and it's like, everybody stay put where you are. The only way the entire city is going to be let loose is if Batman's able to correctly solve this crossword puzzle. If he guesses wrong, then I basically blow up a bomb, right? And the indication here is that if he guesses like 3 across and like 4 down and he gets it wrong, that section gets destroyed with a bomb. And so lives are basically in jeopardy here. This is the kind of thing I'm talking about, right? Like, this wouldn't be a problem if Edward Nygma were dead. And so it's kind of interesting because ultimately Lucius Fox cannot really locate where Edward Nygma is, where the Riddler is. And Nygma just starts cutting off Batman's communications in order to force him in a situation where he has to use his own wits in order to be able to pull this off. And it's kind of cool because this is an insane amount of hubris on behalf of the Riddler, because where this kind of starts going down, Batman ends up, of course, taking Deathstroke, who's currently handcuffed, and then takes him to like a Batman train. Literally, Batman has a bat train. And so while that's happening, while Batman's facing off against these forces of the designer who are seemingly kind of coming out of nowhere and waiting on this train to arrive, then you end up having Riddler who's asking these questions, right? 1 across 9 spaces. The more I take, the more I leave behind. Batman's response: footsteps. Joker comes in, 8 down, 5 spaces. What has many keys but can open no doors? Batman's response: piano. He's answering all these things like that, right? Just off the top of his head. And this is James Tynion really showing the intelligence of Bruce Wayne. This is one of the most important aspects, and it's one of the coolest things, right? Because like when you look at Snyder's Batman run, what really showcased Bruce Wayne's intelligence was the small things, right? Now, some of that was because it's Batman comics, Batman can't die, because, you know, he's just too popular for DC to kill off. He just sells too well, right? And so that's why Batman always comes out on top. But to see a display of his intelligence like this, just constantly countering Edward Nygma's questions, every time he asks a scenario, Batman basically answers almost perfectly, right? 10 across, 11 spaces. A woman shoots her husband, holds him underwater for 5 minutes, hangs him, and then takes him out to dinner. How is that possible? The response of Batman: photography. She took a picture of him, right? Being able to like counter every single one of Edward Nygma's riddles off the top of his head with the greatest of ease, despite being completely battle worn and totally exhausted, shows how far above Edward Nygma Batman really is. And that's where Nygma starts getting pissed off. And that was always his weakness, right? In comics, that was always the weakness of Edward Nygma. He would let his temper get the better of him if Batman started getting the better of him. It was just kind of it was always the thing that ended up catching him off guard. Now from here, this picks up with Catwoman and Harley Quinn in a pretty interesting scenario, right? We end up finding out what it is that Harley Quinn and Catwoman are actually up to. And in reality, it's just Catwoman. Harley Quinn's just kind of along for the ride. But we end up finding out that what Catwoman is looking for is someone called the Underbroker. And this is an individual who basically has access to essentially every bank account across the entirety of Gotham City. You can access anybody's account using the help of this particular guy. Now, Catwoman says that she has the account numbers, that she is a member of their club in good standing, and this basically leads to Catwoman being allowed in by the Underbroker himself. The issue with this is that as Catwoman gets in there, they're met by the arrival of Punchline. The Punchline is actually there. Not only that, this is when Harley Quinn meets the Joker's new girlfriend for the very first time, and it is cool because Harley Quinn doesn't initially know that. Instead, it's just kind of like Punchline's like, I'm here to make a withdrawal too. I'm the punchline. I'm where you end. It's kind of a lame phrase to have, but it is a cool thing to see them encounter each other, because when Harley Quinn's like, who in the world is this person? Catwoman's like, she's the Joker's new girlfriend. And Harley's like, oh, this girl's in for a time. You would think Harley Quinn would be pissed about being replaced, right? Like, oh, no. Let me tell you something. Harley Quinn is often imitated, never duplicated. That's not the response, right? That's not what happens. Instead, Harley's kind of like, okay, so like, you're in for a rough ride. Like, I know it seems cool to be the Joker's new girlfriend at the moment. He's gonna screw you up in ways that you can't even begin to imagine yet. Not only that, Harley's whole thing is like, are you funny? Because you don't really sound funny. And like, Punchline tries to make a few sort of veiled threats and outright threats and tries to make a few jokes here and there. But at the end of the day, Harley's not buying it. She's like, I've been around this block more than a few times. You got nothing. You got nothing, no jokes, no puns, no anything. You are a poor man's Harley Quinn. And then she basically tells her, like, in a few years and a few dozen cries in the shower and so on and so forth, I'm gonna buy you a frozen margarita and we're gonna have a girl-to-girl chat about how you made the worst decision of your life. But until then, I'm gonna bash your head in with a hammer. And immediately attacks the girl. I love that. Not only that, of course, Catwoman ends up getting her hand on the Underbroker, and then we end up finding out, who this guy is, right? That his name is Harlan Graves. This guy has all kinds of information, but Catwoman knows everything about him as well. And so it's like, if you don't tell me what I want to know, I'm going to start spewing all your private information for Harley Quinn and for Punchline to hear. And if you don't want me to do that, you're going to take me to a computer terminal to get me where I need to go. The reality and what seems to be going on here is that if the designer does have the plan of Catwoman, which was to rob Bruce Bruce Wayne and seemingly has sent Punchline for that purpose to access that computer terminal, then of course Catwoman is there to basically withdraw those funds or to move those funds to a different location so that the designer can't get his hands on it, right? So Bruce Wayne doesn't lose everything. And so with that being the case, Batman ends up tracking down the Riddler after he recognizes where it is the Riddler's at. He takes out the Riddler, right? It's not a great big huge thing. Riddler's not really physically capable in comparison to Batman. The Riddler's taken out pretty quickly. Batman basically knocks out Deathstroke with a tranquilizer dart. That's enough to keep an elephant asleep for a few hours. So on Deathstroke, it'll probably work for like half an hour, 45 minutes, you know, because of his healing factor. And so Batman is basically kind of met by the arrival of the designer who says, you know, it's cool, you've unraveled all your adversaries' designs. That's awesome, but it's not going to be enough because you must know that if I'm in Bruce Wayne's office, then it means I must know who you are. And the designer confirms that in saying, hello, Bruce Wayne, it's time that you and I have a conversation before I kill you. What's going on, guys? This is Rob, and we are back again with Batman, the conclusion of their Dark Designs. And you guys really seem to love the video where Harley Quinn met the Joker's new girlfriend. You guys really seem to enjoy that video. So in this one, we kind of get the end of it all, right? You know, the end of the whole thing, or at least the conclusion kind of starts to kick off. Now, this does go into Joker War, which is kind of the next big storyline in the Batman mythos that DC's kicking around. I have no idea if it's going to tie into like the three Jokers, the storyline that was teased to us like 2 years ago. We just never got because hashtag reasons, no idea. But regardless, for those of you guys who recall our last video, we basically picked up with Batman encountering the designer, right? And the idea was that the designer had somehow returned. It seemed that he'd been killed by the Joker, or at least by, well, really by the Joker, and then along with the other villains who more or less kind of turned against him. But, you know, the fact that the designer's here now really kind of gives us a perspective into what's going on. Because what you get here is Batman basically telling the designer, tell me how this goes, right? Give me this scenario. And the designer's response is, no. Like, if you've already deduced it, then you tell me what happens. And so we kind of get this big explanation in terms of how it was all supposed to go down, right? So this is how the designer's plan was originally going to unfold in the city of Gotham before everything went belly up with the Joker and all those guys, right? So initially the idea was to bring in 5 of the highest paid assassins, the best paid assassins in the whole world, right? And at that point in time, back then when this was all kind of brought together initially, right? Because the actual plan of the designer took place in the past. It would have been Deathstroke, Deadshot, Lady Shiva, KG Beast, and Merlin. Now the whole idea behind them was to basically launch a simultaneous attack all at once in the city of Gotham, not against the entirety of the city's populace, but instead against those individuals who would basically be in the line of succession when it comes to the fall of the mayor, right? So you'd have the mayor who would be taken out, the deputy mayor, the public advocate, the city comptroller, and the majority leader of the city council, right? So they would all be taken out in one fell swoop, just all seemingly happening in almost an instant. This would lead to Batman basically jumping in and starting to investigate. But what it would also lead to is the Penguin basically becoming mayor of Gotham City. Now, as the mayor, this in turn would move to the Riddler, and the Riddler would lock down the entirety of the city of Gotham. But what he would do here is he would operate on 2 fronts. The first front would be a ruse. It would basically be, well, there, you know, riddle me this, and all the puzzles and all that kind of stuff. The truth about it was to basically isolate the NYPD precincts, and then only those individual police officers who were basically willing to come forward and swear loyalty to the Riddler would be allowed to navigate from one location to the next. But what it would do is it would lock down entire precincts, and it would make it easy to take out a multitude of different cops, right? Because if you don't have to worry about police officers running all over the place, going underground, hiding, different things like that, you can just start taking them out in huge chunks. Other precincts don't know what are happening to other precincts because all lines of communication are effectively cut off. It would make it easy to basically take control of the entire police force, or at least get rid of those who were not loyal and keep those who were loyal. This goes into Catwoman, and because Catwoman would be the one that would basically be dealing with the money, she would effectively hack into all the various accounts of the richest man in Gotham City, Bruce Wayne, and she would come to the realization that the Wayne Foundation is actually funded by offshore accounts. And the way this would work is she would basically have all those different account numbers in hand. She would drain all those assets and then redistribute them accordingly based on whatever the plan calls for. But what it would do is it would basically make her the richest woman in all of Gotham, and then in turn she would be the bank for all the various criminals that are out there, the place where they can save their money, they can put their money there, and then using those various offshore accounts, she can run that money offshore and keep it hidden away from everybody. This finally goes into the Joker, and the Joker's task was simple. The Joker would kill Batman and Robin. It's the only thing that he would do, right? It seemed to be the only thing the Joker really wanted to do. And with all of that happening, the designer essentially would allow the various criminals to take out and to really conquer the entirety of Gotham City in one fell swoop. It would happen almost overnight, right? It would happen so fast before Batman even realized what was going on. When he first began the process of investigating, they would be miles ahead of him, right? They'd be almost done with their plan by the time he first started his investigation into what was going on. Now, Now, a lot of that was based on Batman's inexperience at the time, the fact that he wasn't that great of a superhero. I mean, he was, but in terms of his detective skills, he's learned a lot over the time that he's been operating as a superhero. And so to capitalize on that lack of experience would allow the designer's plan to come to fruition. And so ultimately Batman's response is, you know, I'm not the man that I was, like I have evolved, I caught up to your design and I am equal to it now. And so this leads to the two of them getting into a kind of sword fight of sorts. Now, this jumps back over to Catwoman, and Catwoman coming to this realization that kind of going through and accessing these different accounts, that the Wayne Foundation is actually funded through offshore accounts. And it seems pretty shady, right? Because the way that it looks, for anybody out there, the way that it looks is there's just a whole bunch of other corporations out there or companies out there who are all basically working alongside Wayne Foundation, and they're probably looked at as like subsidiaries or something like that. But basically Bruce Wayne himself doesn't really seem to own anything. In reality, it's all money that's owned by Wayne Enterprises. But this is also beneficial because with Bruce Wayne being a person who operates as a superhero, operating as Batman, he doesn't want anybody to know how that money's being spent. And the truth is that if there was a breadcrumb, digitally or physically, in terms of actual hard cash, somebody would come looking, right? Somebody would be able to trace that breadcrumb and then ultimately draw the conclusion, the accurate conclusion, that Bruce Wayne is Batman. And so in order to remove any possibility of him being tied to how the money's being spent with regards to things going that basically Batman would use, it's using a series of shell companies in order to hide it. And so it's kind of a funny thing because Catwoman for the most part knows all this, right? Now the underbroker, the person who's well, really, she's not really doing it he's not doing it of his own volition. Like, she's basically told him that she was going to dump his identity if he didn't help her. But this guy has no idea that Bruce Wayne is Batman, right? In his mind, it's just this guy's probably up to some seedy stuff, and that's basically it. But regardless, the response of Catwoman is, we're going to drain all these accounts, right? Like, you're going to drain all those accounts and you're going to put them in my account, right? You're basically going to put these accounts in my name and I am going to become the richest person in Gotham. Now, keep in mind, Catwoman isn't doing this in order to take revenge on Batman. She's doing this to ensure that Bruce Wayne can remain Batman and not lose all of his money, right? And that's really the only reason why she's doing this at this point. Remember, you know, her stance on the whole plan and everything all has kind of changed over the years. And so following this, what we do is we jump to probably what you guys want to see most, which is Harley Quinn versus Punchline. Now, Punchline, we don't really know much about her history, her origin, or anything like that, but the way that she fights Harley Quinn really seems to show that she's a pretty top-notch fighter. She's by no means prodigious, right? Because Harley Quinn's not the greatest fighter there ever was, right? Fighting her is not like fighting Deathstroke or somebody like that. But at the end of the day, you know, she's, you know, having this conversation with Punchline, talking to her, Punchline basically saying that, like, at the end of the day, Harley Quinn wanted to fix him. She wanted to make him better, right? She wanted to water him down basically into nothing. That ultimately Punchline looks at Joker for the way he is and is in love with it. And so the response of Harley Quinn is, you're a groupie. You're basically a Joker groupie. But the idea behind Punchline is that it's not really about that, right? It's not really about any kind of physical gratification that she gets from being with the Joker, if there even is any. What makes him so interesting to her is that the Joker could conquer Gotham City, and Harley Quinn could have been there for the entire ride, but she didn't want the Joker for the way he was. She wanted the Joker for the way she wanted him to be. Now, that wasn't initially how it all went down, right? Harley Quinn was initially in love with the Joker, right? That's one of the many origins of her character, but the long and short of it is that she always, in some form or fashion, was enamored by the Joker, the role he played, the way he saw the world, all that kind of stuff. And where she was kind of swept up in that, it wasn't until she began to really see what the Joker was about that she started to see that she was better off without him. And so as time began to progress, you started seeing these stories in DC Comics where Harley Quinn would leave the Joker, she'd go off and do her own thing. The Joker would basically run her out, like he would kick her out, she'd go and do her own thing, whatever the case was. She kind of began this process of separating herself from the Joker more and more often until eventually she just walked away, right? She just basically left the Joker in his entirety and he'd just been operating solo that entire time. But it's kind of crazy because one of the funny things is that Punchline seems to be highly enamored the same way that Harley Quinn was, and she even goes as far as to say that, like, the Joker says, I'm the funniest person he knows. Well, the response of Harley, who's been around this block more than a few times, is like, yeah, but he says that to everybody, right? Like, he said that to Batman, he said it to an old nun who couldn't talk anymore. Like, he's the Joker, he jokes, like, that's what he does, right? So if you're really buying into what he's telling you as an absolute truth, then you're an idiot. Like, he's a bad guy, right? Like, he's a villain. And the response of Punchline is, maybe he is, you know, and maybe he will hurt me one day, but I'm gonna hurt you first. She manages to get the upper hand on Harley and then slices her throat. Following that, they toss her body into the water, and then she in turn starts to go after Catwoman. It's kind of crazy to see Punchline take out Harley Quinn that way. But picking back up with Batman and the designer again, the two of them sort of going at it and continuing to fight, so on and so forth. One of the things that Batman figures out is that the designer had underestimated Gotham City, right? That the designer believed he could just kind of roll in here and basically start pitching these ideas to these various criminals on ways in which they could topple Batman and Robin and then take the city for themselves. But the reality is that the designer designer underestimated the Joker and he underestimated Gotham City. Given this plan and the nature of what it is that he wanted to do, at the end of the day, it would only really work if Joker was willing to kill Batman and Robin. But the truth is that the Joker didn't want to. He wanted to kill everybody else, but he didn't want to kill Batman and Robin. And it scared the crap out of the designer because the Joker couldn't be explained. He couldn't be rationalized, right? He couldn't be categorized. He wasn't somebody that was just based on a simple desire to acquire money or anything like that, right? Like it's like the Dark Knight. He just wants to watch the world burn. And that's really what the designer didn't grasp. When the designer first showed up here, he thought the Joker was just a petty serial killer, right? And like appeals to his vanity or to his desire to acquire wealth or to vengeance by taking out Batman and Robin would be all he really needed to be on board. But when the Joker was brought in by the designer and the designer learned what the Joker was really about, that he was really just a madman. He was an absolutely insane person. He didn't care about the identity of Bruce Wayne and Robin, or I'm sorry, Batman and Robin. He didn't care who they really were. He didn't care about killing them, that in fact he wanted to keep them alive and just make them suffer by killing everybody else. The designer realized he was beyond any real ability to be reasoned with. And so ultimately, this cost the designer his life. And when Batman pulls off the mask, the designer is actually dead, right? He's basically just kind of like this shambling shell, as Batman refers to it. And ultimately, he's being controlled by the Joker. And that's when Batman asked the question, what are you doing? Like, why attack me like this? What are you trying to prove? Now, Batman had figured out the Joker was controlling the designer seemingly some time ago. There's not really an indication if that's actually true, but probably partway through this fight, he seemed to figure it out. And the response of the Joker is like, it's not my plan to break you, right? That's what comes next. Like, I have a whole year to do that, right? So, obviously teasing Joker War, but his whole idea is I needed to break her in order to break you, right? So in turn, like Batman realizes it's Catwoman that he's going after. And so immediately Deathstroke jumps in, right? Deathstroke was tasked by the Joker for completing a task. Deathstroke managed to sneak into this place, or managed to get into this place with Batman distracted. And in that moment, stabs him through the leg with a sword. And normally it wouldn't really matter. But the idea here is that if Batman pulls it out, he's going to bleed to death. Right? So he's basically kind of stuck here at the moment, and he has to figure out what it is that he needs to do next, right? Like some kind of a medic's going to have to be sent over here by Lucius Fox. There is no Alfred anymore, right? So it's not like Alfred can tend to his wounds or anything. So Batman's got to figure out what to do. And in that time he needs to figure out what it is that he needs to do, that allows the Joker's plan to continue going. And that's the benefit of all this, right? It's not really the grandiose nature of the plan that provides its success. It's the precious moments in between each step that provides success, right? The fact that Batman has to stop and figure out what he's going to do for like 5 or 10 minutes is all the time the Joker needs to achieve a particular goal. That's really what you're talking about here, right? As fast as the mind of Bruce Wayne works, his ability to react almost instantly, right? Whatever that case is, this means that the Joker has to be able to respond accordingly. And all this stuff seems to have been prepared for. And so switching back to Catwoman, once this is all done and Catwoman's work is finished and all this money has been transferred to essentially another external account, then the response of Catwoman is remove all my information, right? Delete all my account information. All of it has to go. And at the end of the day, the response of the underbroker is, well, I mean, your account is actually quite empty, right? Like you believed you were transferring all this information to your account, and you believed that what we were going to do now was remove your account from this database so nobody else could access it, but there's nothing sent to your account. Your account's dead because you were never sending money to your account in the first place. With that happening, there's a gunshot. We end up finding out Punchline pulled the trigger. Catwoman is essentially down for the count, and then in turn, she calls the Joker, and the Joker asks the question, is it done? And she says yes. And the Joker says, say it. I want to hear these words. And the response is, Joker, you are now worth over $100 billion. All right, guys, we are here with the finale of Dark Designs. Really, it's not even the finale, it's the beginning of the Joker War, right? I love how this is being done. Right, here's the thing. I love what James Tynion's doing with Batman, right? It's the best thing coming out of what used to be DC Rebirth. I love what he's doing with Batman. I was a fan of Tom King's run. I would say that this whole thing, Dark Designs, is an amazing story, right? I would say this follows very closely to Snyder's Batman run, if that gives you any indication. But what this does here is this initially picks up with Bruce Wayne in his younger years. And Bruce Wayne is more or less just kind of waiting on a guy, like waiting, just sitting at a table, doing these little designs of Gotham City. It's kind of funny because he basically says they were never really a design for the city. The dark designs were always for him, right? But he ultimately ends up basically, tracking this guy down, finding him, and then basically following him. And he basically tells him, look, like I followed your clues. I know you're in there. Like I know who you are. I need to talk to you. And ultimately, Bruce Wayne kind of makes his way in. And this guy basically says, or at least Bruce reveals this guy's name is Cassander Wycliffe Baker. Now, for those of you guys who were following our story, or at least following the Dark Designs, this guy was the nemesis of the designer, right? The guy that the designer basically spent all this time trying to track down, or at least trying to defeat, spent years and years and years in a room creating a plan, so that by the time this guy Baker figured out what was going on, the plan was already almost done, right? And Baker's days were essentially finished. The other funny thing about this too is that Baker basically, you know, indicates he knows who Bruce Wayne is, right? He knows exactly who he is, which isn't really the biggest thing in the world, right? It's like from Batman Begins that like Bruce Wayne would have to travel 2,000 miles to find somebody who didn't know his name. But the way that James Tynion really kind of hits on this to really show how good of a detective this guy is he says, like, I can tell from the cut of your jacket which port of Japan you traveled here from, right? I can tell you where you learned the art of the katana, right? I can tell you where you were when you learned how to slow your heartbeat. I know all these things about you, right? The cut of your hair tells me where you learned how to fly. The calluses on your hand tell me where you learned to forge metal. Like, I know all these things about you. I know everything about you just by looking at you. That's how good this detective was, right? That's how good Baker was. You could take one glimpse at Bruce Wayne and then say, I know everywhere you've been within the last, you know, however long. And when Bruce asks, how could you possibly know? Baker kind of reveals this secret room where he has like all these pictures all over the place, right? And it's kind of like this is everything I know about this place, right? Everything I know about you, everything I know about everything. I've seen all kinds of stuff. And he says, I'm going to teach you the most important lesson. I'm not going to teach you how to be a detective. I'm going to teach you how to lose. And that's a super important thing here. And on the surface, it's easy for you to kind of be like, okay, that's weird, right? And to kind of write it off. No, it's not necessarily important to win. It's important to know how to lose, because if you know how to lose, you know how to understand why you lost, you know how to correct the reason you lost, and then you know how to win. Because the reality of this is you don't win 100% of the time, right? It's like that line from Ocean's 11, right? Like, because the house always takes you, right? No matter how long you play, if you play long enough, the house wins. Unless when that perfect hand comes along, you bet big and then you take the house. That's basically what this is, right? It's Batman being taught at a very young age, you're going to lose. It's going to happen, right? It's inevitable. But what you have to learn is how to recover from that loss and how to go forward accordingly. And so what we end up doing is picking up in the immediate aftermath of the last video that we covered, right? The last comic where basically Batman was stabbed through the leg by Deathstroke. Now, a lot of people kind of looked at it as though it was some kind of a joke, right? Like Batman stabbed through the leg. You know, what's the case? It's not just a random leg stabbing, right? Like Deathstroke hit an artery. Now, technically, if he really wanted to kill Batman in 30 seconds, he would have stabbed him in that artery right down there in the groin, right? You'll bleed out like that, right? It'll take no time at all. But he stabbed him in a location where it's like one of these things, if you pull it out, you're going to bleed to death. And that's why Lucius Fox was basically contacted to get in here, because it bought Deathstroke time, right? It bought Deathstroke the time he needed to basically leave, right? So Lucius Fox has to get here. Batman's not going to go anywhere. He's not going to go running out, because any major movement he makes takes the risk of you know, exacerbating this stab or this injury with this sword. So he's going to have to just wait until Lucius gets there. Then Lucius is going to do whatever he has to do. He's not a medic, right? He's not Alfred. He's not a trained doctor, right? So he's going to do whatever he can. And then there's a time for Batman to recover, however long it takes for him to recover. That buys Deathstroke a breadth of time. And when you're talking about a scenario like this, all Deathstroke really needs is like half an hour to 45 minutes. And he's on a plane, gone out of Gotham City, and who knows where he's at. And this is also singularly more important because while Batman wouldn't normally have the resources to track Deathstroke down if he wanted to, remember, all those resources are gone now, right? So you end up having basically Lucius Fox, who kind of just throws like a compression bandage, more or less, onto Batman, which does enough to kind of keep him from bleeding out all over the place. You know, it's more or less just kind of like taking your hand and covering over the wound and putting pressure on it. That's all it really does. It's a stopgap measure, right? The response is like, Bruce, you have to go to a hospital and get some kind of surgery done or something like that, because if you don't, you're just gonna bleed out. And so what Lucius does is immediately start dropping all this information, right? Like Batman tells Lucius, like, they have the fortune now, right? Joker has all my account numbers, all that information. He's got everything about me. And the response of Lucius is, yeah, I know. Lawyers have already seized your house. Like, you're wanted for embezzling millions of dollars, which we know Bruce Wayne was doing, or at least that seemed to be the case, that like Bruce was funneling money, or he was embezzling money out of the company into foreign accounts, and Wayne Enterprises itself was doing that, running through foreign banks. Bruce Wayne's wanted for all of that, right? So he's wanted by the law, his fortune's gone, he has nothing, right? It's just like, there's really nothing he can do. And the response of Lucius Fox is, I would love to be in your corner the way that Alfred was. I'd love to be the guy who would be here and help you every step of the way. But if I'm gonna fight this off, I have to operate as the CEO of Wayne Enterprises. I can only keep them at bay for so long. So I can't be in your corner. I have to go take care of this, right? And it's one of these things where he says, if I was Alfred, sure, I'd be able to do that, right? Because Alfred was a Swiss Army knife. Alfred did everything, but I'm not Alfred Pennyworth. I'm Lucius Fox, and all I can do is the best that I can do. And so in turn, you have Batman who asks, where's Selina Kyle, right? You think he would have asked that already because it's the woman he's gonna marry, but he's like, where's Selina Kyle? And the response to Lucius is she was shot, she's in a hospital, and then he's just like, I want to talk to her right now. Where Lucius is a little hesitant about that, focusing more on the health of Batman that he's getting ready to pass out. You know, Batman's like, I don't want to hear any of it. I want to talk to Selina Kyle. And this basically leads to Lucius kind of putting his daughter on the phone, who puts Selina on the phone, and Selina's kind of in and out of consciousness, right? She's barely making it. She's just slightly unconscious. And it's one of these things where Batman kind of hits at where he feels like he fell short, right? Where he feels like he kind of screwed up. It's one of the great things Tynion's focused on here, and it's one of the elements that's fallen under the radar, right? There was this really good moment when Batman confronted Deathstroke, and they were kind of going back and forth in this argument, and Deathstroke was like, you were the one who like you stepped it up first, right? Like you were the one that made things worse first. We were criminals who were doing things. You stepped it up against us, right? Like you exacerbated the situation. And Batman's response was, yes, I know. And that's really kind of how Bruce Wayne was, right? That Bruce Wayne was a kid whose parents were shot in front of him, and he's been crying about it his whole life. And he ended up going through all these different training sessions, learning all these different things. And when he came back to Gotham City, he didn't meet with an equal force. He met with overwhelming force, right? He hammered him. It's like, what was it? The Dark Knight, the Dark Knight film. He hammered and hammered and hammered all these different guys to the point of desperation. He's the one that made things worse. That instead of responding to them with an adequate force, he responded with more than what he needed. And that's what made things worse in Gotham City. It was Batman's actions that pushed people further and further. And it's what made things more and more extreme. Not only that, he, you know, because of the life he lived, because of the person that he was, he systematically pushed away everybody that cared about him, right? Everybody that mattered to him, he pushed every single one of them away. And it led him to where he is right now. This was not the life Selina Kyle was banking on. Selina Kyle joined up with Batman because she was expecting a better life. She was expecting things to improve, but Batman made them worse. And so the result of this is that he basically says, like, I'm going to go and I'm going to try to clean this up and I'm going to try to make sure everything's sorted out. You know, hopefully you can forgive me and hopefully you'll be here when I get back. But he's like, I'll kind of be waiting on you. And in his anger and in his rampage, of course, he smashes a window. But Lucius Fox is kind of shocked to hear that Batman's actually going to go out, right? He's got a stab in his leg where he's just bleeding out, but he's going to go out there and continue to fight anyway. It's one of these things where Batman's making a stupid choice. He's making a stupid decision that he seems to kind of be overcome with emotion. But the reality of this is when he kind of chimes in and he says, Lucius, it's not just vengeance here. It's not me just pissed off because my money was taken and I'm really mad. He's like, there's a bigger picture at play here. The Joker has all my resources. He has everything that Batman had. He's got all the Batmobiles. He's got everything in Wayne Manor. He's got all the money. He's got all the technology. Everything that I use in order to function as Batman is now in possession of the Joker. So here's what you're gonna do. You're gonna call up Leslie Tompkins, who most of you guys know is the one that basically, she's kind of like the night nurse from Marvel Comics, right? She's the one that basically runs a free clinic where she tends to the injuries of various heroes, some villains, depending on what the situation is. And then he basically says, like, what you are about to see in the city of Gotham is going to be an attack from the Joker, and it's going to be like nothing we've ever seen before, right? Because this is not the Joker flooding the city with Joker toxin like he did during Endgame. It's nothing like that. This is Joker on a whole new level. It's the Joker with advanced technology and with insanity. Who in the hell knows what he's going to do, right? And so you kind of switch over to Deathstroke for a moment, and this is kind of a quick throwaway thing, and it's easy to ignore, but it's massively significant because you've got Deathstroke talking to Lady Shiva, or I guess Cheshire is really what her name is, but you know, she's kind of like, nobody here they're all kind of pissed off that they were used, and Deathstroke's like, I don't really care, you know, they were getting paid well for it. And when she asks, like, what are you doing? He just says, like, 9 million people. And she's like, what? And he's like, I'm just taking one last look. And like literally looking at the city of 9 million people, which is about to devolve into absolute chaos and pandemonium. Switch over to Batman, who goes to get Catwoman because he knows Joker's going to start coming after everybody. When he gets there, she's gone. He has no idea where Catwoman's gone to. She's just vanished. Now, initially the implication was the Joker's henchmen showed up and snatched her up. No, the Joker's henchmen are there and they're like, it was a smart move getting rid of Catwoman. So they don't know where Catwoman is. And where they kind of make this offhanded remark of, you know, I doubt the boss would care if we had some crossfire, some casualties. And they ask him, and Joker's on the phone and he's like, no, I really wouldn't mind. I'm in such a good mood. Go ahead and take out a whole floor if you want to, right? And where Batman asked the Joker, do you have Catwoman? He says, no. She bailed the second that she was stitched up, right? She saw this coming, man. I don't know why you didn't, but she saw this coming. Right? Like maybe she knows your real bae's back in town. Who knows? But whatever the reason is, she's out of here, right? Like she basically ended up taking off. And that's when the Joker starts to taunt Batman. He's like, oh, you're bleeding out. You got to go and get yourself stitched up, man, because with the war that I'm going to bring you, I want you at 100% because I want you to know that when you lost to me, you didn't lose because of some technicality. You didn't lose because you weren't functioning at full capacity. I want you to know you lost to me when you were at your best, right? I have your money. I have your house. I have your company. The Joker's like an ex-wife, right? Like I have your house, your car, your company, company, I have the kids, I have it all, I have the dog. Hell, I even took the goldfish. Like it's nuts, right? The Joker's like, I have everything of yours, man. I have everything that belongs to you. I'm going to take all these toys that you've been building in Wayne Enterprises. I'm going to take all these things and I'm going to use them, right? Like for years and years and years, you've been fighting me and I've been using the resources of an abandoned toy factory. Well, guess what? That's not the case anymore, man. You're totally alone. You have none of your resources. You have none of your money. You have nothing at your side. You've got no family. You've got no girlfriend. You've got no butler. You are absolutely and totally categorically alone. It doesn't look very good for you. That's what's so crazy, because the Joker's like, I've got designs for this city, man. I've got designs for everything. I'm going to tear this city from the ground up and I'm going to rebuild it all. And you're going to be the one that pays for it all. And he says, so let's get this started. He says, boys, fire. They open city on Batman, just start spraying down. Batman jumps out of a window. You immediately switch to Catwoman, right? She wakes up kind of seemingly out of the middle of nowhere. And we find out she was rescued by the Penguin. That the Penguin's like, man, this is a pretty wild situation. Like it's initially, you know, she kind of says, well, you know, when he asks about the designer, she says the designer's dead, right? Joker's been playing us this entire time. And the Penguin's like, okay, so like I can let you into the private lounge. This private lounge is called the Cool Room, right? This whole place basically houses, and it's actually so cool to see the Mad Hatter again. I haven't seen him in a while, but it houses basically almost all of Batman's villains, right? And the response to the Joker is like, this place is basically a safe house, that when things pop off, this is where we go. Like when things are bad enough, the whole city's in jeopardy, this is where we basically kind of hang out at until things get terrible. I don't see Kite Man, which really kind of sucks, right? I'd love to see Kite Man. Hell yeah. But nonetheless, you know, when Catwoman says like, I need to get out of here, the response of the Penguin is, that's not possible. This entire place is in lockdown, right? It's a Joker attack, which is kind of wild, right? To hear that like when the Joker decides to attack Gotham City, this is how all the villains react, right? There's no like holding the Joker off. It's like, okay guys, let's all go into lockdown. Let's go underground. You know, the Penguin says hundreds of people, probably even thousands, are going to die. We're sitting this one out, right? So like buckle in, Catwoman. It's going to be a long, bloody summer. It's nuts. And so you end up switching back over to Batman, who's just kind of musing to himself, right? Talking about everything that he had learned from Alfred, how Alfred always wanted him to strive for better, how Alfred looked at Bruce Wayne, who was kind of governed by this notion of vengeance, and was kind of like, you have to become better. And Bruce Wayne finally kind of buys into it and says, yes, you know, with the entire city, with me being the only thing that I have left, yes, I ask you for a signal. What do I do? And he kind of gets one in the form of like an electric storm, and he says, I will become a better Batman, right? Now, we don't know what this means. That's what makes it so cool. We don't know if Bruce is like, yes, I'm going to become a better Batman. I'm going to be more ruthless. I'm going to be more cruel. I'm going to be like I was after Jason Todd died, basically, until like Tim Drake showed up into my life and became the new Robin. Or if he's like, I'm going to be a more honorable Batman, right? I'm going to make up for the failings that I had when I initially became the guy that I became. Is he going to be a Batman who works alongside all the other villains to take out the Joker? We have no idea. We got to wait to the next issue. What's going on, guys? This is Rob, and I was going to pick up with Batman Joker War, the newest installment of the Joker War, but we're going to sidetrack from that for a second. We're going to cover the origin of Punchline. So I feel like this is probably one of the more interesting stories, right? And kind of what I think a lot of Batman fans want to know, right? Like, what's the story of Punchline? How did Punchline become the Joker's new girlfriend, right? So this comes out of the Joker 80th anniversary 100-page super spectacular one-shot. And comic books do this. For those of you guys who are new, comics do this from time to time, right? They'll have like a super popular character that's been around for a really, really long time. And they'll do like a one-shot comic to celebrate that character. Like when Action Comics reached issue number 1000, they did like a whole bunch of different stories just celebrating the history of Superman. And it was just like this great big huge amalgamation of different stories from different writers and different artists and different things like that. It was cool. It was pretty awesome. And this one's more or less the same way. But what this does here, and this is actually a cool little tribute, it picks up in a place called Snyder College, of course named for Scott Snyder. Because aside from Dennis O'Neil and Neil Adams, he's probably the single most influential Batman writer in the history of the character, to be honest with you guys. You know, like it's kind of nuts given like the work he did, the fact that like when New 52 launched, that it brought in a whole new wave of Batman readers, and the story was written so well, and it's probably one of the most celebrated Batman stories of all time, right? One of the most celebrated Batman runs that's ever been written. So it makes sense, right, that there would just be kind of a tribute here. Plus I'm pretty sure James Tynion and Scott Snyder are friends. So this picks up basically with what's more or less just called kind of a make your, you know, celebrate your superhero day is really what this is. And you've got this guy Dean Bob, Rob, who's talking to this young woman, right? This girl named Alexis. And the reason why is because of the fact that in really within the last little while, there was an attack in Gotham City where a girl named Sarah had lost, some people that she knew. And this was all, as a result of a Joker attack, right? A gas attack. And the reason why this matters is because unlike everybody else who's basically celebrating their favorite heroes, celebrating, the Flash or Batman or Green Lantern or Superman or something like that, Alexis has a Joker shirt on. She's celebrating the Joker, which is wildly provocative, right? And it's not simply just her wearing a shirt, like she's kind of obsessed with the character of the Joker, right? She's obsessed with everything about him, right? She's got posters, she's got like all kinds of stuff, drawings, artistic renderings. The funny thing about this is that some of these drawings are a combination of things, right? So you've got an Alex Ross depiction of the Joker, which is up there. You've got the Joker from The Killing Joke. You've got like just different versions of his character over the years that are shown there. This doesn't necessarily mean that it's like an in continuity thing, just kind of a cool little tribute by the artist of the comic, right? Is really all it is. But the idea is that the dean comes down here, telling her, hey, like this is kind of a problem. You have to take this whole, you got to take this shirt off, right? This is kind of offensive to people. And the reality is that where he claimed that he came down here as a friend, she kind of calls it right off the bat and is like, no, you didn't come down here as a friend. You came down here because you're scared of this shirt. You're scared of what it represents, and you know that it's dangerous, right? What you want me to do is to go out into the quad, right? Usually on universities you have what's called a quad, which is like a great big huge park area more or less inside the university where most people hang out at. And she's like, you want me to go down there and you want me to like let out some tear-jerking cry about how I'm maladjusted and this shirt is just some outward manifestation of the inner turmoil that I'm struggling with because I really can't figure my place out and I'm just crying out for help and all that kind of stuff. And she's like, no, that's not the case at all. That's not what this is. It's not that I'm maladjusted. It's not that I'm crying out for help. That's not at all what's going on here. Your concern here is that you have a dangerous student who believes in something dangerous that's operating right under your nose. And in the midst of all that, she literally like blows smoke in his face. And when that happens, of course, he, kind of waves it out of the way and then kind of starts talking to her. And as he's talking to her, begins to kind of start laughing a little bit, right? And he's like, what in the world did you do to me? And she's like, well, I got the recipe off the internet and I didn't know if it really works, right? I didn't know if it was going to work at all. You wouldn't believe how many different chemicals that it takes in order to make it. But I have a pretty good teacher, right? Looking at the closet, she's like, I have a pretty good teacher. So it's like, okay, got a laptop stored in there or something like that. But, she's like, for me, like the paralytic is finally setting in, but don't fight any of it, right? I want to get all of this on camera. And the reason why is because that girl, Sarah, has been playing up her whole tragedy for likes, right? She's been playing it all up on social media. She's trying to get the world to feel bad for her, and how crappy of a person do you have to be to take your own personal tragedy and throw it out there on the internet? Not because of the fact that you actually care about the people who had bad things done to them, not because you care about them as people, but because that sympathy story is going to get you more likes. It's going to get you more followers, right? You're doing it just to manipulate people. How crappy of a person do you have to be in order to pull that off? But if what she wants is horror, then I will bring her horror. If what she wants is suffering, then I will bring her suffering. If what she wants is real pain that she can put on the internet, then that's what I will give her. I'm going to dress you up like a victim of the Joker, and I'm going to put you in her bed. And so that when she comes in, she's not going to be posting on social media for likes. She's going to experience nightmares day after day after day. She's going to see your face in her sleep, and she'll never catch a moment's peace. I will give her what it is that she wants. I'll give her what it is that she's asking for, even if she doesn't know that she's asking for it, right? And that's what's kind of crazy here, because this girl, like Alexis, she's just dark. And that's kind of what she says. She's like, this is all your fault. You asked for this, right? You and your generation asked for this. You kept telling us as we could grow up, we could be anything we wanted to. And you left us some kind of half-ass world to live in. We could be anything we wanted to. What you never considered is that some of us don't want to be the good guys. We don't want to be the ones who save the world. We want to be the ones who destroy it. We want to be the ones who tear it down and build it into something better and something new. Now, that's actually an amazing point to make, right? Because there's certain assumptions that are made, right? To kind of sidetrack this for a second, there's certain assumptions that are made, right? And it's kind of like these unwritten assumptions, right? Like when we tell our kids, you can be anything you want, we tell them that under the assumption that what they want to be is something good, right? Like a contributing member of society. And that's not an unreasonable assumption to make. Nobody says, hey, I told my child they could be anything, and so they became like a sociopath. Like that's not really, what we aspire to. What we aspire to is, I told my child they could be anything, and so they became Batman. That's what we're talking about, right? Just like awesome things. In the real world, I would, right? Like That's like that meme, right? They said I could be anything, so I became Batman. Like it's cool, right? It's a cool little thing. It's nice. And so because of that, you know, this is kind of the opposite side. It's people basically getting what they asked for, just not exactly what they were asking for, right? Like she was raised and told you could be anything you want to. But the other part of this is there's kind of a darker side to this. The way she sees the world is a darker place, right? The world sucks. The world's crappy. The world's full of terrible people, right? If humanity wanted to get it together, humanity would have gotten it together by now. But humanity hasn't, right? And so humanity is inherently bad. People just don't care about other people regardless of what they say, right? They say one thing, they do another. And so because of that, like, it's important to just rip it all down. And that's where she became enamored with the Joker, right? Like the whole world is built on this ridiculous joke, and she's the punchline, right? Hence where she got her name from. And that's when he kind of starts basically succumbing to the Joker toxin, or at least this basic toxin, in the most intense way. And then from there, she kind of chimes in and she says, okay, like speaking to a person we can't see, if what you wanted was for me to prove that I'm not some fangirl, right? If what you wanted was for me to prove that I'm actually serious about wanting to become your henchman, then here's the proof. Here's the proof that I'm ready to get serious. And we find out that in that closet is the Joker himself, right? By some manner and some means, she managed to get a hold of the Joker, right? She managed to get a hold of this guy, and this guy was intrigued by her. He was interested in her. Now, we all kind of know that at the end of the day, she's a means to an end, right? That's really all Punchline is. She's just a way for Joker to like achieve a goal, or to get back at Batman, or even to get back at Harley Quinn, right? The Joker's schemes don't make sense to anybody but himself. But regardless of what his motivations are, she got his attention, and she was interesting enough that he didn't kill her. So because of that, you know, she's kind of like, you know, what comes next is going to be wild, right? Like it's going to be insane. It's going to be serious. And the Joker's response is, no, it's not going to be serious, my dear Punchline. What comes next is going to be hilarious, right? And so what this does is it basically kind of bookends to everything that starts with the Batman story, with the Joker War, right? Well, really even before that, the introduction of Punchline and all that kind of stuff. So in terms of our Batman playlist, we'll probably position it up there, you know, basically ahead of everything else, so you can kind of go into it knowing who Punchline is and having that whole story. You'll kind of have to ignore the segments that we were talking about in the previous videos where we're like, we don't know anything about Punchline. So maybe I'll just leave it here. I don't know. I'll figure it out. All right, what's going on, guys? This is Rob, and we are picking up with the official event of Joker War. And I love this story. Like, this is amazing. Here's the other thing, too. It's good to see Jorge. Here's the thing. I'm not sure exactly how it's pronounced. Is it Jorge Jimenez or is it Jorge Jimenez? I'm not 100% sure how to pronounce it, because I know that the J is silent in Spanish, but I think it's only silent under certain circumstances. So I'm not sure. But nonetheless, we are picking up with the very beginning of Joker War. And this is a cool thing, because what this does is it actually picks up years ago, right? At some point, presumably in the early days of Batman's career. And there's a couple reasons why we can kind of pit this together, and I'll talk about that here in a second. But what's happened here is the various experiences of Batman in dealing with the Joker are starting to come to a head, in the sense that all these individuals who are killed through the Joker toxin are deformed in some pretty gruesome ways. Now, the crazy thing about this is you don't really see people like that in recent days, right? In recent years with the use of Joker toxin, right? They just kind of seem to die with a smile on their face, but with these really gruesome expressions and gruesome appearances. It's messed up, but it's kind of cool to see at the same time, right? To kind of show the heinousness and the callousness of the Joker reflected in how people look when they perish at the hands of the Joker toxin is kind of wild. But one of the things that's going on here, of course, Alfred being alive, but Batman talking to him, and Alfred kind of asked the question, how many has this quote unquote Joker figure already killed? And Batman kind of responds by, I'm not really sure this is going to end, and that kind of a thing. So the discussion they're having is that they don't really fully understand who this Joker guy is or what he's about. And this all really points to the idea that they've just encountered the Joker seemingly for the very first time, or in the very early days. Now, the reason why this matters is because we go back to Batman's 0 year, and we go back to the origin of the Joker, at least insofar as we got during the New 52, and we have this idea of when Batman first encountered Joker, that happened in the very, very early days of him becoming a superhero, right? So we're talking about within like the first 2 to 3 years of Bruce Wayne becoming Batman when this took place. This is very, very early on. But one of the things that Bruce Wayne picks up on pretty easily is that the Joker's motivations, as he said in Batman the Animated Series, his schemes make sense to no one but himself. And that's what makes the Joker so dangerous. One of the things that Batman kind of picks up on here is that when it comes to the average criminal, they do what they do because of money or because of the thrill, right? Whatever the case is, like they do it as a contract killing, right? So it's like when Agnes Heller outlined the 3 reasons why people commit crimes, right? People commit crimes for profit, in which case the consequences don't matter. People commit crimes out of passion, right? Like some guy or some girl comes home and finds their significant other cheating on them, they lose their minds and stab them to death. Or or they do it out of compulsion. They couldn't help themselves. But regardless of the situation, neither of these three things matter to the consequences. The third one seems to be what applies to the Joker, that for whatever reason he sees the whole world as basically meat. In the eyes of the Joker, everybody's already dead. All he's doing is just kind of helping them along the way and then achieving his own goal in the process. But it's this really almost wholesome moment, right? When he's talking to Alfred, and Alfred's like, there's no way I'd let you face off against a guy like this on your own for the rest of your life, right? And so what this does is it allows basically Batman to kind of break, or at least, the Batmobile to break into an aqueduct, for all that kind of stuff to go nuts, right? Bruce Wayne driving his Batmobile. But more so than that, we get these sort of news blips, right? Wayne Enterprises is experiencing what's basically a hostile takeover, in the sense that Joker has taken over all the assets of Wayne Enterprises, right? That Bruce Wayne himself has basically indicated a kind of pattern of embezzlement, siphoning money off of Wayne Enterprises illegally and then using it for personal means. That Harlan Graves, you guys know him as the underbroker from the last few stories that we did. He's the guy who's basically the legal counsel for Wayne Enterprises now. And the other part of this is that the Gotham Gazette received a multi-billion-dollar cease and desist, right? So they were basically told, if you don't stop publishing these articles saying the Joker's the one who took over Wayne Enterprises, we're going to sue you guys into oblivion, which of course the news ended up giving way because, 2020, that's what the news does. But nonetheless, it's one of these things where basically from all different directions, Wayne Enterprises in its entirety is now completely and totally under control of the Joker and his henchmen, right? Batman is, not only does he not have any control of his company, he's wanted for embezzlement. And so this guy's back is against the wall in almost every conceivable way. The other part of this is that when it comes to Lucius Fox, he's basically infected with the Joker toxin. Not in the most extreme degree, but just enough to where that Punchline can get the kind of information that she needs out of him so she can relay it to the Joker. And what she wants to know are all the different locations that Batman has within the city of Gotham, but more specifically within, Wayne Enterprises, that he can use at any particular point in time. Now, again, this is a great way for James Tynion to actually feed off of what we've seen over the years from Scott Snyder's New 52 run. This is one of the things that Snyder brought in, where in the various buildings that were built by Wayne Enterprises or purchased by Wayne Enterprises, that Batman had put in these little, kind of mini bat caves that he could operate out of in almost any situation, right? So no matter what the emergency is, he can go there and he can operate out of that place. And so where Lucius Fox kind of asked the question, where's the Joker gone to? Punchline says, where would you go if you suddenly became worth $100 billion? And so we pick up with the Monarch Theater. Now, the Monarch Theater, for those of you guys who don't know, is a significant place in the history of the Batman mythos. And the reason why is because this is the theater that Bruce Wayne and his parents were at when they left and they were shot to death in Crime Alley. And so you end up having the owner of the theater who's just kind of taking the Joker on a tour through this place, right? Kind of showing Joker around. And he's almost kind of explaining to the Joker what's going on, right? That this place used to be part of what was called Crime Alley. This is where the Waynes were killed, that you couldn't really walk up and down the street without having to worry about, being shot or something like that, which really sort of begs the question, why in the world did the Wade family go to the seediest part of town to see a movie theater, right? Was there just like not a theater close to them, right? That they could have gone to? Because let me tell you something, guys, in every town, there's two theaters, right? The theaters that rich people go to and the movie theaters rich people used to go to. Those are the two kinds of theaters that exist. I remember that was an old Chris Rock routine from back in the day, but it's true, right? The rich kind of have a tendency to cut themselves off from anybody who's deemed to be not rich. So I guess maybe it does say something about the Wayne family that they spent time at the Monarch Theater. But regardless, it's an explanation here by this guy and basically saying this place has a pretty rough history about it, right? Like there's almost a kind of spirit of vengeance, almost a kind of spirit of haunting that permeates throughout this place, where it's just sadness and misery all this time. Because following the death of the Waynes and really kind of the collapse of this part of Gotham, nobody really goes there anymore. And it's kind of a crazy thing because even Wayne, Bruce Wayne had shown up here a couple times and tried to buy this place and was always turned down every single time. And so where this, owner basically says that he kind of hears what sounds like laughter, the response of the Joker is, well, it's probably just the wind, right? Old theaters like this, they probably have that kind of wind going through here. And so what we end up learning is that the Joker approached this owner with a massive amount of money. Now, we're not given an actual numerical value, but we can kind of specify that it's enough to buy a small town, right? So it's probably in the millions, if not possibly in the double digit millions. It's an exceedingly high amount of money. And so what ends up happening is this guy continually kind of picks up on the fact that there's some kind of laughter here. And the Joker says, you know what? You should go join them in the audience. The show's getting ready to start. And this guy doesn't know what the Joker's talking about. Of course, the Joker's watching The Mark of Zorro, which is the movie that Bruce Wayne and his family were watching when they left the theater and they were killed. But basically, we end up finding out that all these individuals out there who were Jokerized are sitting down in the audience. And of course, this movie owner is going to go the same way, right? He's going to get Jokerized too. And that's basically going to be the end of him. But again, it's kind of nuts because you have this scenario where Bruce Wayne finally makes his way into the Wayne Enterprises building. And when that happens, he kind of just starts looking around, right? Analyzing where the various people are, all the henchmen with guns. And it's the smartest move of the Joker to put in as many people here as possible, right? To station everybody on every conceivable floor. Not only that, because Batman basically gains access directly into one of the mini bat caves, one of the micro caves, he almost kind of assumes it's a safe haven. But as soon as the lights come on, you've got Punchline there who immediately goes after him. Now, here's the important thing to understand. Punchline has no chance against Batman, right? So before people start commenting, no way Punchline would win. Yeah, we know. Like, we know Punchline wouldn't win against Batman, right? At that point, you're just preaching to the audience. You're just stating the obvious, right? Like, the sky is blue. That's all it really comes down to. But it's kind of a funny thing. And this is what I love about how James Tynion handles this, because you've got Punchline on one side, you've got Bruce Wayne on the other. Under any normal circumstance, when I say normal, I mean Punchline being herself, and the only way she could win is she had the powers of Superman, she still comes out on top. And the reason why is because you have this moment where she goes and attacks Bruce, and Bruce basically kind of implements these small little things here and there, these small little devices, but Punchline knows about all these, right? The booby traps and things that are there, this kind of iconic Batman suit that's there, right? Like this wholly new Batman suit that I've never seen before, but looks amazing. Like, it looks so cool. It's almost kind of like a John Henry Iron Steel Batman suit, you know, like Superman suit, but for Batman. It's almost kind of what it looks like, right? Like, okay, here's what I want to know. Everybody watching this video, if you could name this Batman suit, what would you name it? You know, that's what we're gonna call this video, the new Batman suit. Like, if you could name this suit, what would you call it? That's what I wanna know, because it looks cool. But the other thing, and this is why I love the way Tynion handles this, is that again, like, it's Punchline in a room, Batman in a room, Punchline's gonna lose. But then we end up finding out that what she'd been doing here is Batman starts to kind of get a little hazy, right? Get a little foggy in the brain, a little sluggish. And Punchline basically tells him, oh, what's actually going on here is that I've been permeating this room with poison this entire time. It's 1 part Joker toxin, it's 1 point fear toxin, and 1 point venom. And the venom, you know, the venom basically prevents the Joker toxin from killing you, but it basically enhances what goes on with the fear toxin, right? So it's kind of like this wicked cocktail. And this is genius, man. Like, it's so cool, because the initial knee-jerk reaction to this would be like, no way Batman would go into this. But here's the other thing you have to understand. Batman wouldn't expect anybody to know that he has these little micro caves. They're probably not even on the blueprints, right? The only person who would know about it is Lucius Fox. And the expectation is that Lucius Fox is in hiding. Nobody would really be able to get to him in the conventional way. And so it's cool, right? Because it's just a way to kind of get the upper hand on Batman. The thing is, like, once he starts making his way, or at least he tries to leave, suddenly he's met by the voice of Alfred saying like, hey, you're going the wrong way, you're going backwards. And when Batman's kind of like, Alfred, what in the heck is going on? Then like Alfred chimes in and says like, he's taken everything, right? He's taken the vehicles, he's taken your city, he's taken everything. You have to get out of there. And Batman looks up and realizes the Batwing is flying towards him, right? This Jokerized Batwing is flying towards him. And it's just, and Batman's like, what in the world? Like, you're supposed to be dead, right? And Alfred's response is, I'm sorry, my boy, I'm so sorry. We're all dead now. And that happens right as this thing open fires directly on Bruce Wayne, right? So like the Batwing looks like it kills Batman. Okay, so we are picking up with Batman, the Joker War Part 2, Part Dos. And here's a funny thing, man. Like, I feel like James Tynion's killing it on Batman, which my bigger question is, why didn't they slap him on Batman before? Okay, so the cool thing about this is that this initially picks up in Gotham City, right? And we're just kind of given this idea that it's years from now, right? Some point in the future. But basically, like, you have what amounts to almost kind of like this futuristic version of Gotham, right? I mean, it's almost like a utopia. It's like what Metropolis is, right? It's sunny and it's beautiful and it's not crappy and thunderstormy the way it is now. So basically, like, it's not Seattle, but basically, like, you've got Batman chasing down the Freeze family. Now, it's kind of weird, one, because of the fact that every time I see the name Victor Freeze, I always think of Victor Fries, and two, because he's got kids, right? One of them's called like Snow Cone, and it's like, and the other one's like Ice Pop. It's like, all right, James Tynion, we got to work on your name scheme. A lot of this kind of seems to be individuals or young kids who were just kind of wrapped up in Victor Freeze and taken to be as, you know, more or less like proteges. I mean, as far as I'm aware, Nora doesn't have the ability to produce children unless he made them using, you know, her DNA or something like that. But regardless, Batman takes them out pretty quickly. And then we switch back to the Batcave, right? Like the kids are basically being shunted off so they can receive some kind of treatment. And Bruce Wayne's an older guy. And it's kind of wild to see him that way, because my initial thought was, okay, so like Superman became Batman, basically. basically, which is kind of a weird thing. But he's called Master Bruce, so it's Bruce Wayne, and it's kind of nuts, right? Because we're given this idea that like Gotham is everything Batman wanted it to be, that it's this beautiful utopian place where crime is an almost non-existent concept. You do have a few criminals who pop up every now and then, but instead of Gotham being this terrible cesspool of a place where all the worst possible things could and do happen, then instead it's any city everywhere that has some measure of crime, right? For the most part, it's a great place, just a few bad apples. The problem with this is that it's all an illusion, because immediately Alfred just kind of starts losing his mind. His neck snaps, he's got the Joker grin, and he's like, this whole thing is lies. You're gonna die alone with no family, with no one to love you. You're gonna die a lonely, miserable life, right? Like Batman's biggest fears, and then he snaps up, right? Snap back to reality, as Eminem once said. Like he snaps right back up, and he's basically just kind of recovering from this toxin that he was hit with by Punchline. Now, that's kind of the crazy thing, because the toxin that she used is wildly potent, and that's what makes it so wild. I wouldn't go as far as to say Batman has like an inherent, immunity to like the fear toxin of the Scarecrow, but it's something that he's used to, and to have it impact him in this way where he's been out for days is kind of nuts, right? It's kind of wild. Now, of course, Harley Quinn was the one who saved him. Harley Quinn looking the way she is, she's the one who saved him, and of course she, more or less had herself stitched up, from her injuries. But with the 3 days that he's been out, Batman kind of asks, what's going on? Gotham has descended into absolute madness, and I absolutely adore the way this has been done by James Tynion, right? Because my fear, and I'll be honest with you guys, my legitimate fear going into this, when Tynion was like, well, here comes Joker taking over Gotham, it was going to be a repeat of Endgame, right? Where he just like floods the city with Joker toxin and everybody goes crazy. I was afraid that's what was going to happen. No, not at all. Instead, Joker's there, but it's really kind of Punchline who's running the show. And for the most part, the various gangs of Gotham have all unified under the ideology of the Joker, right? So they're all basically Joker gangs. They've basically taken Batmobiles, turned them into Joker mobiles, Joker cycles, Joker planes, the whole 9 yards. Like all of Batman's gadgets and uses have been handed over to the Joker crowd. The other part of this is that people are basically just kind of fleeing for their lives as best they can. The whole city's turned into madness, but you do have a few instances of people who have taken up arms themselves. It's kind of a cool thing to see, right? The people have basically just taken up arms to protect their city as best they can. And ultimately, that's what it runs into in this kind of situation. That it's only when things are at their absolute worst that people will actually get up and stand up for themselves, right? That if they have somebody there to protect them, to keep them safe, they'll rely on them almost all the time. But for the most part, like any scenario we would expect, the city's madness. You basically have people who are running amok under the mantle of the Joker versus what few people here and there are trying to do what they can to keep themselves safe, while most everybody else is just hiding in fear. And that's why, Batman kind of asks, like, where's the Joker in all of this? And that's where Harley responds, the Joker's not really the one running the show all the time. A Punchline is the one running most of the show that's going on. The Underbroker basically has his lawyers keeping the city at bay, right? So in a lot of ways, it's kind of the Dark Knight Returns, right? Instead of it being Bane that cripples the city of Gotham, it's the Joker who's done it by taking all of his resources and all that kind of stuff. Now, I know there are huge parallels there, but to be honest with you guys, just based on what we've seen with Gotham being the way that it is, I actually kind of think this is better. And so from there, Harley ends up revealing that the Joker kind of has like this, Joker bought up ad time basically in the city of Gotham, because we know with news companies and so on, if the money's there, they don't care. And so what you end up having is basically just like the Joker running ads all the time on TV with the same kind of thing, right? The guy that you thought died, right? The old man who ran the theater, who apparently didn't know who the Joker was, which is kind of weird. A Z was carved onto his face, which is pretty gruesome. And he tells like this amazing, it's not funny, but it is a thrilling tale of adventure, romance, and vengeance. A story of a man reborn as a hero. A story of the symbol he would use to mark the world. The Mark of Zorro, remastered and better than ever. This is the Gotham cut. Only 3 people saw the ending last time, and it changed the course of the city's history. What happens when everybody sees the real ending? The Mark of Zorro, now playing back-to-back sold-out screenings at the Monarch Theater. Wide release is only days away, coming to every movie house in Gotham City. And like as he reads this off, it's like, prepare for the final shot. And he's like, no, please. And like the Joker shoots him. It's not funny, but it is. This is why I love the Joker, man. Of course, this brings back terrible memories for Batman, right? Like Monarch Theater, and Harley grabs him and kind of snaps him out of it, right? And it's kind of cool to see that like Harley Quinn's the one who's trying to pull Batman back from the edge. Like you would think it'd be Selena Kyle in this instance, but at the moment, it's Harley, right? Selena Kyle bailed out, right? It's Harley who's trying to pull him back. And it's interesting to see because you don't really see her in that light. The closest I think I ever really saw to Harley Quinn in this way was during the New 52 Batman run by Scott Snyder, when she approached Batman and told him like, Joker's not who he used to be. Now, of course, that was after she hit him with a sledgehammer and knocked him into a vat while she was wearing a Red Hood mask. You know, she's like, you know, Joker's not the same that he used to be. He's not the same old Mr. J. Like, he's different now. There's something different and twisted about him now that wasn't the same way it was before. I feel like that's the closest we got. But one of the things she says here, and this is what's so cool, she's like, you can't go out there right now and do all this. You're not in the mindset to do it. You still got this toxin running through your veins. You still got to let it work out of your system. If you go out there now and you get yourself killed, then like, we're all gonna die, right? So it's interesting to see Harley Quinn in this position to where she's like beseeching Batman to stay behind because he's the only one that can really keep them alive. But the cool thing about this is Batman finds a method of control. And that's what I think makes the fear toxin so incredibly potent, right? Because when you're infected with this toxin, your imagination becomes your enemy. But for Batman, he's a wildly focused individual. And what he does is focus all of this into the voice of Alfred. And so it's kind of like Alfred comes back in this regard, that Batman knows Alfred isn't there and he knows he's not real, but letting the fear toxin take the form of Alfred's voice is one, kind of focusing this fear toxin in a way where it's not nearly as potent, and two, putting it to use because he becomes Batman's conscience. And that's kind of what Alfred was, right? He was the voice in the back of Batman's head that was guiding him when he wasn't always there, letting him know what the right thing to do is. And so of course, with everything kind of going down, you know, people being cornered by these you know, gangs and so on and so forth, Batman basically leaps in, takes a few of them out, and then kind of goes about, right? I mean, Batman's not the kind of guy where he would like look at these people being attacked by the Joker gangs and be like, best of luck. Here's a batarang, you got it, and then just take off. Batman's gonna fight those guys off and then, you know, continue on his way to the Monarch Theater. But as he gets in there, it's a horrifying experience for Batman for a variety of reasons, right? One, because The Mark of Zorro, as most of you guys know, was the movie his family went to go see when, you know, of course they were shot, and Monarch Theater was the theater they were coming out of. So this is like a terrifying experience for Bruce Wayne. Now, at this point in his life, he's basically past it. You know, his parents' death is really more of a means to achieve a particular goal as opposed to the thing that kind of haunts him and keeps him down. And so what he ends up doing is once he gets in there, the whole place smells like death, right? Rotting flesh, the whole 9 yards. Everybody in here is basically dead. And it's a wild scenario because Joker pops up and he's kind of like, when Batman asks the question, like, why are all these corpses here, right? Like, they look like they've been decaying for years. The response of Joker is, because they have, right? This is our family. This is everyone that I've killed in the pursuit, in this cat and mouse game that you and I have going on. Everyone who's been a victim of mine. And what I've done is I've given them a kind of toxin. I've given them a substance that will reanimate them. In effect, Joker creates his own zombies and sends them all after Batman. What's going on, guys? This is Rob, and we are back again with the events of Joker War. This time we're on part 3. And if I'm being honest with you guys, I think we are getting what is more or less a new Red Hood. And I'll explain what I mean here in a minute, because there's Red Hood as you guys know him, and then there's Jason Todd the way he originally was, which I feel like only the most diehard fans would probably know. But this initially picks up in Tri-Corner Yards, right? Basically the shipyards in Gotham City. And we basically got Punchline. Now again, this is one of the things that I love that James Tynion's doing with Punchline. With Harley Quinn, this is something that's kind of interesting. With Harley Quinn, she was the sidekick of the Joker, but more insofar as she was like the comic relief, as well as the one that was designed to kind of maintain the sex appeal. With Punchline, sure, she's somewhat drawn in that way, but she's a lot more hands-on in terms of like the Joker's ongoing operations, making sure things run. Like, she's like a field commander, more or less. It's kind of what you would expect. But I do really like the nature of Punchline. One of the big things that kind of goes into this, though, is that with all these containers being moved, this is all part of the Joker toxin, right? The Joker basically plans to use on the city of Gotham. The problem with this is that the henchmen of the Joker are a little uncertain about going into what's basically the Narrows, right? Like the shady part of town. And you wouldn't really expect that of the Joker henchmen. They're literally criminals and thugs, right? Like, if anybody was going to be at home in the Narrows, it would be these guys. But there's something in the Narrows that scares the crap out of them. And what we end up doing is picking up with the Narrows the day before, right? In this neighborhood. And we pick up with Clown Hunter. Now, this is kind of the cool thing. This is why I say this guy, I think, is kind of like the new Jason Todd, right? Like the new Red Hood. So what you end up having was a couple of the henchmen of the Joker who were basically driving the Batmobile, or at least one version of the Batmobile. And Clown Hunter ended up tracking them down and then basically, you know, incapacitated the vehicle using like a fire hydrant, right? Because it's like electrically powered and so on. So this guy basically figures out a way to short circuit the Batmobile, which, if I'm being honest with you guys, kind of on the fence about, right? I feel like if Batman were going to create a vehicle designed to basically allow him to fight crime in the city of Gotham, one of the first things he would think of is what happens if it gets wet? What happens if it's raining outside? But that's kind of the cool thing, right? This kid's ingenuity, because it wasn't simply just water that led to this thing being being short-circuited, it was him bringing like a portable transformer. And that's all it really took, right? Just like an electrical base, some water, and then like a huge surge of electricity. And so with this thing being incapacitated, he ends up cracking one of the windows and then pours gasoline inside and sets it on fire, and the guys burn alive. The reason why I say I feel like this guy is the new Red Hood is because when it comes to Jason Todd, there's two versions of his character. There's Jason Todd as he was originally created, then there's Jason Todd, the character who he became after the events of Crisis on Infinite Earths. So in the original appearances of Jason Todd, while you didn't necessarily see him do anything as hardcore as this, there was an instance where he actually pushed a criminal off a ledge. Now, by the time Batman got up there, the criminal had fallen, and the response to Jason Todd was, well, he fell, there was nothing I could do, but it was heavily alluded to that Jason pushed him over, right? Like Jason was the reason that guy died. And it was kind of given to us that Jason was not Dick Grayson, right? Dick Grayson was the guy, like he was a believer, right? Like he believed in the cause of Batman, and he fought alongside Batman, and until he decided to go on to become Nightwing, that kind of a thing, but he never would have gone down that darker path. Jason Todd did. And that was something that fans didn't like, right? Fans didn't like the idea of Jason Todd becoming more extreme, more intense, combined with the fact that his origin was basically identical to Dick Grayson's, right? They saw him as like a darker carbon copy of Dick Grayson himself. And so that's why you went into the post-crisis landscape. DC changed his origin. Fans still hated him, so they got him, they basically killed him off. But Jason Todd was very, very dark in his early appearances in DC Comics, right? And that's what this feels like, right? This feels like Jason Todd the way he originally was. And that's why I say I think this is important, because I have a hard time believing that some character named Clown Hunter that's given a name by James Tynion established in terms of who this guy is, that he's tracking down the various villains of the Joker, that he's killing them off everywhere that he can find them. I have a hard time believing this kid's just going to kind of be thrown away. What I think is going to happen is that at the end of all this, he's going to be taken under Batman's wing, and he's going to become the new Robin. Maybe not the new Robin per se, maybe just kind of like a different name, but it's going to lead to like Damian Wayne probably, continuing to be Robin, but doing his thing on the Teen Titans, and this guy becoming the new sidekick of Batman, right? I'm not really sure how that'll go down, but that's kind of what it feels like. But what it leads to is it leads to Punchline basically saying, okay, fine, if this is the case, I'll go and track this person down myself or get a hold of the Joker or whatever, but like your job is to get this to his destination. If you have to go around the Narrows, then go around the Narrows. But if it's not where it needs to be in time, then you guys are going to be the ones I'm going to point the finger to. And do you really want the Joker coming after you because you missed your shipment? Make your choice, but make sure you choose wisely. Now, the other part of this is it switches over to Batman dealing with this movie theater full of all these corpses. And the Joker hits in, and this is something that I love the most. And this is why I love what James Tynion's doing with Batman. You end up having the Joker talking to Bruce Wayne, right? He's kind of been taunting him, giving him a bit of a hard time while Batman's dealing with all this. And he says, I wonder which one of these people hate you more, right? Because like these are all corpses of people who have died at my hands. I wonder which ones hate you more. The ones who basically died at the very beginning of all this when you underestimated how many people would die in all of our conflicts, or the ones who died recently, knowing the longer I was out there, the more people I would kill. And that's the coolest line of logic, because that's one of the things that I've always kind of said about Batman, that while people will say, well, Batman doesn't kill, right? That's the rule of Batman. The question becomes like, is it a good rule to have, right? Just because it's a rule doesn't mean that it's a good rule. And when you're talking about so many bystanders being killed on a regular basis, then what it does is it allows you to shine Batman in different lights, right? You can shine Batman in a more positive light and say, see, he's a good hero, he doesn't kill. But then you can shine him in what's really a more realistic light and say, yeah, but his villains do. And for every villain that he leaves, that basically gets out onto the streets, and Batman believes in this rehabilitation tactic, and then in turn gets these villains back into Arkham Asylum, knowing they're probably going to escape, or they're going to get back out, they're probably going to end up killing some people, then it turns into, is Batman really doing Gotham any good? Because if he knows the villains are going to escape, but he won't kill them, and he knows the villains are going to kill people, Batman is in effect sacrificing innocent lives for his belief that he can rehabilitate, villains like the Joker. That's basically what it is, right? The rehabilitation of the Joker is more important than the life of the average person. We know that by virtue of Batman's actions. And that's what makes this discussion and this debate so cool. Is Batman really a good hero? Can you really call yourself a good hero if you willingly and knowingly sacrifice the lives of innocent people in order to try to fix a villain? There has to come a time when you basically say, okay, enough is enough. I'm not willing to sacrifice any more innocent lives for you. Like, I will break my code for this. Like, sure, it'll make me as bad as you, but the city will be better for it. It's an amazing little philosophy here that the Joker has, kind of pointing at that fallacy of Batman, right? Like, look at all these innocent people that I've killed, and think of all the other innocent people that I'm going to kill, because I'm going to make all of them relive your experience. I'm literally paying them to come to this theater, and they're going to watch The Mask of Zorro, and they're going to have the time of their life, and then I'm going to start pumping my Joker toxin in here, and they're going to die, and they're going to be reanimated with these nanites as one of my henchmen, right? So they have no idea it's coming, but we're going to do this over and over and over and over again. It's awesome. I think that the way the Joker's being handled here is amazing, because Because I think one of the biggest problems the Joker has over the years in DC Comics is the Joker's only ever really shown in one of like 2 or 3 different ways. You're either given the super silly Joker from like Steve Englehart, you get like the silly and the sadistic Joker, which is what you got back in like the 40s with Bob Kane and Bill Finger when he first popped up, or you get like the Scott Snyder New 52, just crazy twisted Joker. But to have this version here, who's kind of like a combination of all of them, right? Like he's silly, he's twisted, but he's also incredibly dark, makes this some of the best Joker storytelling that I've read in a long time. And that's my question. Which version of the Joker do you guys like more? Do you like the one from like the New 52 Batman run, or do you like this version? Because I'll be honest with you guys, I kind of like this version more, right? Like I love the way it's drawn, and I love the way he acts, and I love his plan. I really dig that. Now, the other thing here is, remember, while Batman is hallucinating because of this toxin, he is feeding on it, right? So Alfred's been dead. Alfred's been dead since the events, since he was killed during City of Bane, during Tom King's Batman run. And so Batman, basically hallucinating Alfred is a way for him to essentially control this hallucination experience that he's having, to control all of that. Now, where his mind and where the Joker kind of starts getting into his head, and he actually starts to hallucinate all these different people who are coming after him as Jokers, right? When in reality, they're just, corpses, essentially. Batman's able to basically issue an EMP that will take out his earpiece, so he won't really be able to hear Alfred anymore, quote unquote. And of course, it'll take out the nanites that are controlling all these corpses. They basically kind of have them coming back, right? Because they're not truly reanimated undead. It's not like Night of the Living Dead kind of stuff going on here. It's not really like a biological agent or anything along those lines. But once Batman makes his way out of the theater and then collapses while hallucinating his parents, he's rescued by Harley Quinn again. Now, this is where the Joker gets cool, is because what we end up doing is jumping back to him, right? We've got Punchline showing up here and basically saying, hey, there's this kid out there in the Narrows that's basically taking out our henchmen, right? Taking out our guys. And where she thinks the Joker's going to respond with like being pissed off and throwing stuff around, instead, like the Joker's excited about it. And when she asks why, she's like, why would you be so happy about this? He's like, because this is truly chaos that we're finally seeing, right? We're finally seeing chaos happening. That whenever you saw like Batgirl, or for the most part in more recent years, the Red Hood, and even the Red Hood was a little sketchy, but whenever you saw like Damian Wayne, like Robin, or you saw Tim Drake, or you saw Dick Grayson, you saw some other member of the Bat family, it was, we don't kill, right? Like we'll beat you within an inch of your life, but we won't really go past that inch. We don't kill people. It was always the rule of Gotham. But now we've got true chaos out here. We've got people who don't follow the rules of Batman anymore. You got people out there taking the law into their own hands because there's nobody else out there to maintain law and order. And so it's like, this is true chaos now. Like this is what I was hoping for. This is what I was looking for. And so the response is like, okay, I mean, do we let this guy live and keep doing his thing? And the Joker's like, of course not. Kill him. Like crucify the guy. So people know that he can't do that. But it's just cool to see. This is one of the funny little Joker moments. What he ends up telling, like, he kind of makes this comment to Punchline, like, it's time for me to finally basically off Harley Quinn, right? To get rid of Harley Quinn. Punchline loves that because now she feels like she's actually the number one in the Joker's life, which, as we know by virtue of Harley Quinn's experience, it's not always the case. But then you have Batman who kind of wakes up in like this crazy wonky looking place, who's like licked by a dog, and he's like, Ace, is that you? Oh, buddy, I've missed you so much. I haven't seen you in so long, Ace. And it's like, yeah, it's me, Ace the Bat Hound. And then it turns out it's Harley Quinn. I loved that. I saw that. I probably laughed for a solid 2 minutes, right? Like, I thought that was hilarious. But anyway, Batman basically wakes up and Harley Quinn says, this place is Eden. And this is a cool little expansion here. She really says that like within the city of Gotham, there's little secrets and little hideouts, little places that you don't know about where us various villains get together and we meet or we relax and recuperate. This is awesome. Up and I think this is in a lot of ways building on Snyder's Batman run. And that's why the New 52 Batman run by Scott Snyder was just the stuff of legend, because it did these small little things where it introduced elements, whether they were huge or small, that changed the way that we saw Batman. Because we always thought of Bruce Wayne as like the Caped Crusader, right? The guy who knows Gotham like the back of his hand. And then you get into New 52 and it's like, there's this criminal enterprise that's been operating in the city of Gotham for hundreds of years and Batman never knew about it. And then you go here into James Tynion and it's like, there's these small little nooks and crannies that Batman doesn't know about. It shows how ingenuitive the criminals are. Like, it shows how intelligent they are, and like finding places, like they know Batman's haunts, so they know which places to go to and they know which places to avoid. And it's cool to have that, right? Because apparently Poison Ivy put all this together. And initially it was made for Harley Quinn when seemingly she left Joker at one period in time and was struggling with their split, right? With their separation. And it was designed to basically help her relax, and it was help her kind of get away from things. She ends up feeding Batman this kind of cocktail and says, this will basically flush the entire toxin out of your system. But be aware, man, it's going to take you for one hell of a ride. Harley Harley Quinn, like her face turns into the Joker. Like her neck snaps sideways. It just gets wonky. Batman starts losing his mind, and it's like, okay, like this, like none of this is real. And then suddenly he's met by the arrival of Alfred. And it's like, you know, I'm very sorry, Master Bruce, but like, I think it's time that we have a very serious talk. Now, we know Alfred's not actually here, but what this feels like it's going to do is go into Alfred and Batman, and really kind of Batman, more or less having a conversation with himself, and it's going to elevate his character. And I'm very, very excited to see what this comic's going to be about. What's going on, guys? This is Rob, and we are continuing our coverage of Joker War. We are on part 4. I think it is. I think it's part 4. We're continuing the Joker War. So in the last videos that we did, Batman had basically been exposed to a kind of new version of the Joker toxin that was created in large part through a combined effort of the Joker and his new sidekick Punchline. But the nature of this Joker toxin was that it was exceedingly potent, far stronger than really any version that we'd seen before. And it was enough to put Batman in a pretty deep sleep, right? A pretty deep trance, at least strong enough to allow Joker to kind of make his move and have Batman off the board. Now, Harley Quinn did come to the rescue insofar as she was able to get Batman out of harm's way, but she had fed him a kind of concoction that would help him to overcome the serum in his body and then bring him back, right? So he could kind of go back and do his Batman thing. But what this does is this starts up in the mind of Bruce Wayne himself. And it's almost kind of a throwback to some old memories, right? In the sense that he's kind of talking to Alfred and talking about like the nature of the batarangs, in the sense that he made him a little more streamlined to be basically like shurikens, but simply just, you know, like ninja stars more or less, but just a different look, a different design. And it's kind of this interesting scenario because it seems to be in the early days of when they were still working with Lucius Fox, but before Lucius Fox knew that he was Batman. And so he kind of talks about how like they might have to let Lucius in on what's going on because you'll see his work on the streets, that kind of thing. He also talks about how he has a utility belt, and he was like, by the end of all this, right, the bat suit's just going to be like one big utility belt. I want to see that. I want to see like a bat suit that's just nothing but pockets. But one of the things that Alfred hits at is that there's still a part of Batman that believes that like he can save the day, right? That he's full of optimism, right? That he's desperate to believe he can be like the perfect Batman. Now, this is an important thing to understand is because Alfred has kind of been a voice that Bruce Wayne's been hearing ever since he was exposed to the toxin, even when he was awake and he was still struggling. The nature of hearing Alfred's voice was a way for him to kind of focus the toxin into a singular point to where it could still do its job, but it wouldn't really impact how he was able to perform. Eventually, it just became too much, right? And between fatigue and the toxin itself, he ended up kind of succumbing to it completely. But this is again all kind of a hallucination, you know, with regards to Alfred. And it's one of the things that he says that you know, where Batman realizes like, you're not real, right? You're dead. Harley Quinn gave me some tea to overcome this. You know, Alfred kind of gives him this perspective and says like, you have a rare gift that not many people who can affect change have, which is to say you're able to use this moment to kind of survey what's going on in your city from a bird's eye view. Now, it doesn't mean literally. It simply means that this is granting Batman a reprieve. It gives him a chance to kind of look at the bigger picture, see everything that's happening, and decide what his worth is with, you know, with the city of Gotham, the various heroes who were there, all that kind of stuff. And so while he's unconscious, of course, Harley Quinn tending to him is suddenly met by the arrival of Punchline, using this as kind of a chance to basically take out Bruce Wayne, right? To take out Harley and to take out Bruce Wayne. And so with that being the case, we sit back down with Batman and Alfred. And the funny thing is that the whole scenario with Harley Quinn and Punchline is actually going to become a little bit of a background thing here. It'll be relatively even, but I think the main run of this is really Bruce Wayne himself. And Alfred fixes it some tea, right? He says, if we're going to have tea, we're going to do it properly, right? And so he basically makes him a Darjeeling blend. And this is a tea that Alfred served to Bruce Wayne whenever he was stressed, whenever he was frightened, whenever he was the most disturbed from a case that he was working on. This seemed to be especially important during the early days of the Joker because the Joker's crimes were so heinous. And the significance of this tea, as it's explained here, is that it was Alfred's way of telling Batman everything's going to be okay. That Bruce Wayne was too stubborn and really he made himself too hard of a person in a lot of ways to really accept Alfred coming to him, putting his hand on his shoulder and saying, everything's going to be okay, Master Bruce. And Bruce Wayne accepting it and saying, yeah, you know, and being comforted by it. He was on the inside. He just wouldn't really allow himself to show it. And so Alfred wouldn't really tell him everything was going to be okay in so many words. Instead, he would make him this tea. And it was a kind of unspoken conversation between the two, which is cool because it's designed to show the closeness between Alfred and Bruce, right? Alfred was a father figure, you know, in a lot of ways, in almost every important way. And so, you know, he kind of asks Bruce Wayne, like, tell me what's happening, right? Tell me, how bad is all of this? And the response of Batman is that the Joker's using all of his money to tie up the legal system, to keep Joker's gangs on the streets. He's terrorizing people. He's literally taking people out, right? He's taken the entire family fortune, the Wayne Manor, Wayne Enterprises. He had Lucian Fox basically modify vehicles into deadly contraptions and so on, right? Like he's essentially conquered Gotham, and all of it's been paid for by the Wayne Foundation. So the Bruce Wayne Foundation, or really just the Wayne Foundation itself, which was designed and serves the purpose of protecting and making Gotham a better place, is now being used to tear it to the ground. And it's an important thing because Alfred kind of comments like, you've seen this from the beginning, right? You know the nature of the Joker from the beginning. The nature of the Joker is he's cold, he's disconnected, right? He mocks everything that people love. He mocks family, he mocks relationships, all that kind of stuff. And he pulls his allies closest to him as a mockery of that, right? You have Robin, he's got Harley Quinn. And Harley Quinn is designed to be a mockery, right? You treat Robin as a kind of son. Dick Grayson was a surrogate son, Tim Drake, Jason Todd, Damian Wayne was a biological son, but you see your Robins as children and you take care of them that way. You make sure that they become strong, capable. You raise them to become productive members of society. You teach them right from wrong if they don't know. This is the kind of role that you play. Joker abuses his sidekicks, right? He treats them terribly. He makes life rough for them. He puts them in situations that could very well cost them their lives. He's a mockery to everything that you believe. But there's one massive difference between you and him. For the Joker, taking one life is no different than taking a million if it means he can get to you. But this is different for you. You value the sanctity of life. You understand the importance of family and friends. These things are relevant to you. And so you end up switching back to Harley and Punchline. And the fight between these two is pretty straightforward, right? Punchline's got like a flamethrower. She's just like, torching this whole place. And Harley Quinn's like shooting the place up, right? And for the most part, it's kind of round two, but there is a cool discussion here between these two characters. Harley Quinn sees Punchline as kind of a continuation of herself, right? In the sense that there's a little bit of a conversation that goes on, where you have Punchline kind of, fighting against Harley. She makes a comment about the nature of Harley, right? That Harley thinks she's somebody special, that she thinks she was somebody unique, but she's not. That in the end, like the story of Harley is just kind of this boring, mundane, uninspiring story, right? Like Harley Quinn was this young girl, who thought she was destined to do something great with her life, and then she wanted to do something great for people. She wanted to help people and so on. And so she ended up getting a job working in Arkham Asylum and she met the Joker and the Joker swindled her. He tricked her. He convinced her he was a sensitive guy. She got caught up in the whole thing. She ended up becoming a sidekick and then basically ended up leaving, right? What she kind of tells Harley is like, you're a basic Becky. There's nothing interesting about you, right? You're not intriguing. You're just some girl who got her heart broken by a crazy guy. And now that you left, you think you're somehow cut from a different cloth. Like, no, you're basic. There's nothing intriguing about you. She's like, I, on the other hand, I saw the world for what it was, right? The world was going crazy and people were pretending like it wasn't. The world was falling apart. It was going to pieces. And people were just kind of looking around and saying, no, everything's okay. As if they said it enough times, it would be true. And then she heard the Joker speak. She heard him talk. She heard this guy who was talking about how like the world is crazy and the world was nuts, and the only way to survive it was to be as insane as he was. That he, in a lot of ways, kind of offered this vocalized speech on how Punchline saw the world. And she found herself enamored with it. The funny thing about this is that is the story of Harley Quinn. That's the thing. It's what Punchline doesn't grasp. Her story is the story of Harley Quinn, right? It's being caught up by a different means, but it's being caught up nonetheless. She thinks she's special when she's not. And that's what Harley tries to tell her. Like, I thought the Joker had a heart. You think he has a brain. But at the end of the day, everybody's a means to an end, right? Like the Joker doesn't care about anybody but himself and Batman. That's it. That's the only thing he cares about. He doesn't care about who he has to hurt, who he has to sacrifice, who he has to put in harm's way, as long as it gets him to the bat. What you haven't figured out is that you're not special. Right? Like you think you are, but you're not. You believe that you can change him, or you believe that somehow you're special in this unique way to where only you can truly understand him. Like you're literally just a victim. Like you've got a victim complex, but at some point in time, you're going to come to an understanding of your place in the world. And you're going to realize you're not as special as you think you are. And that's kind of a crazy thing because it almost seems like what Harley Quinn says impacts Punchline if she thinks it's true, because she's like, you believe you're wrong and I'll prove you're wrong, right? Like I'll show you what the Joker really believes once I kill Batman myself. And that's her mistake, right? That's the obvious instance that she doesn't truly understand the Joker. Because if she did, she would know that the Joker doesn't want to kill Batman, right? Like that's not the whole idea. The Joker loves the cat and mouse game. He loves the idea of Batman chasing him. That's what he digs, right? That's his whole shtick. And so if she kills Batman, the Joker's probably going to kill her just out of wrath, just out of anger. And so you switch back to Alfred, you switch back to Bruce Wayne. And one of the things Alfred says here, this is probably one of the most amazing conversations, one of the most amazing things that Alfred brings up, right? He says, you take yourself too seriously, Master Bruce, right? But Batman is a child's dream. You can travel the world and learn every possible way to save everybody. That's a child's perception. Only a child would look at that and think that it's actually possible. But once you get out into the real world, once you learn the limitations of humanity, you realize that you can't do it on your own. But the dream is still possible in the sense that yes, you can save everybody. You just need the help of others to do it. And he says, like, you've spent too much time trying to save my life because you won't accept that I'm dead. You've pushed away the people that remind remind you of that fact. You hold it against Damian Wayne, right? Damian Wayne was the one who went into Gotham during the City of Bane and was, despite being told, if the Bat family enters here, I will kill Alfred. Damian was the one who believed that he could say Alfred. He went into the city. He basically broke the truce. That led to Damian Wayne, once he was captured, seeing Alfred killed right in front of him. Batman holds it against Damian, saying like, if you hadn't gone into Gotham, then he never would have died. You hold it against Dick Grayson because he was shot in the head, so he became Rick Grayson, one of the worst story arcs ever. But like, he became somebody who wasn't Dick Grayson. He wasn't his normal self. You held it against Selina for making you feel like it was never safe for you to come home, that you felt like you couldn't really trust anybody. You hold it against everybody else. But the reality, and this is what Bruce Wayne kind of accepts, he says like, I failed. And that's when Alfred just freaks out and slaps him across the face. And he's like, the story's not over, man. Like, you're Batman, right? You have to accept the world that you live in, and you have to accept what you can control. There are things in Gotham that you can't control. You can't make people be good guys. You can't make people do things differently. The only thing you can control is how you operate as Batman, how you inspire people, but some things are beyond your ability to control here. You have to accept that you did not and you cannot save me. You were in a place where you couldn't get to me. You didn't know what Damian did. You didn't know that I was being held by Bane, and you didn't know that he was going to kill me. So you can't hold yourself for that. You can't say like, it's my fault that Alfred died. You didn't know. What could you have possibly done, right? You did not, and you cannot save your parents. You were a little kid. You didn't know that leaving the theater and your father taking that shortcut would lead to them being killed. But even if you tried, what could you have possibly done in the face of a gun at 12 years old? Like, you have to stop holding yourself accountable for these things, right? You can't hold these things against yourself. There's nothing you could have done, but you can save yourself. And in doing so, you can save the lives of so many other people in this city that you love so much. And he says that's what's important. Every life that you save is a victory against death, against the Joker. If you truly want to defeat the Joker, if you truly want to beat him, then be the opposite of what the Joker stands for. If the Joker is death, be life. If the Joker is chaos, be order. Be these things. Be what matters most in this world. And so he tells him, right, like, wake up. You know, where Batman says, like, I don't know if I can do this without you, the response of Alfred is, I'm always here. You've known me your entire life. You don't need me on the other side of a microphone to know what I would tell you. You don't need to hear me tell you that you're doing a great job. You don't need to hear me tell you that I'm proud of you. You know that because you know me, and you know what would make me proud. What would make me proud is seeing you go forward, live your life, save yourself, and make something of the city of Gotham. Batman snaps up, right? Immediately wakes up as soon as Punchline gets to him. Now, let me tell you something, man. This was a girl who was getting a little big for her britches, right? Like, she thought she could take on Batman. You serious? Not a chance, right? Like, Batman wakes up and he's like, okay, so like, this we're playing a different game now. This toxin that was in my system is gone now, right? This toxin is totally out of me, and I'm right back to 100% again. If you want to do this dance, girl, we can do this dance, but understand, I've done this dance with a lot of people, right? And it's like Bane said from The Dark Knight Returns, like shipwrecked men turning to seawater due to uncontrollable thirst. Many have died trying. And so Punchline gets subdued pretty quickly, right? And then after that, it's like, okay, let's take care of this. And so he's like, I need to reactivate my communication systems. Well, the problem with this is that he fried his circuits back when he was at the theater. And then of course we get the most Batman response ever. Don't underestimate what I can fit in this belt. And then he's like, I called the battery, right? This is kind of like a backup system. And he basically, and Harley Quinn's just like, no, come on, man. Like, you know, it's like, it's like, computer, right? This is Batman. Get me the location of the family. And it's like, which family members do you want? And he's like, I need everybody. Cue to Catwoman, right? Catwoman's like, I gotta go, I gotta bounce, right? So she's part of the Bat family. She gets the message from Batman that Bruce Wayne is back. She goes to leave the hotel, right? The club of the Penguin, right? This kind of places us on lockdown while they ride out the whole Joker attack. And she's like, you guys need to come with me. And they're like, why would we leave in the midst of a Joker attack, right? I mean, it's one of these cool things where it's like everybody knows how dangerous the Joker is. And she's like, well, what if I told you that I can make you and Edward Nygma billionaires if you guys come with me? The sound of money, most people will buy into that sound. What's going on, guys? This is Rob, and we're picking up with Batman number 100, right? So this is the conclusion to Joker War. And the cool thing about this is that this initially picks up really with like Burnside, right? The clock tower in Burnside. And the reason why that matters is because this is basically Oracle making her return. Oracle's an interesting concept, right? Because Oracle has people who love her to death, and they have people who just don't like her at all. But the idea behind this was that after Barbara Gordon was shot during the Killing Joke, and then once DC rolled that concept over into the main DC universe, so it became became basically an aspect of her history, they basically kind of gave her this role of Oracle, where she was essentially an information broker. And that's where actually a lot of people were introduced to Barbara Gordon in that role. And so because of that, she kind of has a pretty cool fan base as Oracle, which is a pretty interesting part of her character. But she hasn't really played that role for quite some time. But basically what's ended up happening here is that because the emergency services are all kind of being put in stasis to a degree by the officials in Gotham City due to, legal work and all that kind of stuff with everything going on, basically tying up the city by tying up the courts, what Barbara Gordon does is she actually goes on to a kind of broadcast of sorts, and literally hijacks the city's, radio waves, the radio frequencies, and basically says like Joker's conquered Gotham City, and that any chance the city has to fight back is basically being kept at bay by all the web of money and corruption, right? That's literally paralyzing the mayor and the various city's institutions, right? That like the mayor is on the payroll, all these lawyers and stuff like that, like they're all crooked people, like they're all corrupt and crooked people. And because of their corruption, that this is where we are now, right? That like literally money's able to kind of keep things stopped, keep things locked in place, and that's what allows the city to be conquered. And so what she says is like, stay inside, right? Like don't go to any movie theaters, all the movie theaters are death traps, but stay inside and basically keep your doors locked, right? And I'm sending you guys a kind of an emergency number that you can contact in case you need help. And if that time comes, contact it and we'll send somebody there to help you. Now, in the face of that, what happens is like one of the officers basically shows up to Harvey Bullock and says like, you've got to stand down, right? Like the mayor's ordering you to stand down. Like you have to, basically shut the entire Oracle system down, right? Like what Oracle's doing here, you have to disable all of that. Now, of course, this is done because the mayor's crooked. And so when that happens, like he's basically told, like the mayor's saying, if you don't do this, it's going to be your job. And so ultimately Bullock just quits, right? He takes his badge, he throws it on the ground, he says, look guys, that's my answer, right? Like we've got a crooked mayor running the show. So here's a question that we have to ask ourselves. Do we want to be cops in this crooked city, or do we want to do what's right? The right thing to do is to help people, is to keep this broadcast system going, right? The mayor's just one man, and the power he has is only relevant because we allow him to have it. But what happens if we don't allow him to have that power anymore? Then what is he? Just a man in a suit in a room somewhere hoping that people will listen to him. And that's basically it. And so in the aftermath of that, you end up having, you kind of switch over to Dick Grayson, right, to Nightwing, who's kind of doing his thing and beating the crap out of criminals. But there's also a little bit of banter going back and forth between himself and Barbara Gordon, in the sense that for him, he's like, man, it's actually kind of nice to hear you back again, like in the seat of Oracle, making sure that we're safe and that we're able to do our things as we're supposed to. It's kind of a cool little thing, right? And so the question is, has anybody heard anything from Bruce Wayne, right? Has anybody heard anything from Batman? And the response of Barbara is no, he's probably got bigger things to worry about. And that's when we switch back over to basically the Joker wearing his Batman costume facing off against Batman. And this is one of these really, really cool scenarios where like the Joker makes these exceedingly salient points, right? These amazing points. He's kind of going on and rambling about nonsense, right? That's what the Joker does, right? The Joker just kind of gets under your skin by going on about nonsense, or at least that's the initial response. One of the funny things is Joker makes this comment where he asks Batman, he's like, you really hate guns, don't you? He's like, I used to think that you hated those because you were just boring, but I'm starting to understand why. It's amazing how many explosives you can fit inside these little toys of yours. Why buy a gun when you can just put little bombs inside your utility belt? Which is actually a good point. And so of course this leads to, these small little explosives kind of detonating off, right? And the Joker toxin kind of going everywhere. Your standard fare of Batman versus Joker sort of stuff. But then like Batman starts to get frustrated at the Joker. And the reason why is because Joker starts to basically make all these different scenarios. He literally hits up Barbara Gordon, or at least Batman hits up Barbara Gordon, starts talking to her. The Joker's response is, that's cheating, right? It's supposed to be just you and me. And it's a good thing that one of these devices killed your radio, so you can't really call for backup. And he says, otherwise, these weird little orphans that you keep collecting would have to listen to their dear old bad dad get stabbed to death. Batman gets frustrated and Joker's like, be honest, you're right, it's a costume, right? I look as stupid as you do. And they kind of keep going back and forth. Batman takes out the lights, and then Joker basically uses his ability to see in the dark. And then literally, Batman gets the upper hand on Joker, and it just kind of goes back and forth, right? Now, before we kind of get to this really, really cool moment here, I do want to sidetrack for a second, right? And I want to focus on Punchline. Punchline was kind of a plot thread that was sort of left dangling. And if this was comic books 30 years ago, it would have just stayed left dangling, right? It just never would have been wrapped up. Such as it is, in this day and age, they're pretty good about wrapping up plot threads, right? And so what you end up basically getting is Joker, when he detonates a portion of the factory, that Punchline realizes that wasn't supposed to happen yet, right? And so like something's like, that was supposed to be the next step, something's going on. So then she starts trying to get a hold of the clowns, none of them are answering, and in the midst of all that, you basically have Underbroker who walks in and says like, we have to bring our association to an end, right? Like, I'm no longer going to be able to help you continue to push back the various lawyers and keep the city kind of locked up, in legal hell. Like, I'm not going to be able to do that anymore. So you're gonna have to vacate the premises immediately, or I will call the authorities. And that's in her frustration. She doesn't have anybody to help her out, to cope with this. And so in the midst of all that, she seems to basically leave a message for Joker, right? Kind of telling him what's going on. But then you have Nightwing who shows up. And Nightwing's, this is the first time that Nightwing and Punchline are meeting. And it's actually an interesting encounter, right? He's like, my name's Nightwing. We haven't really met, been out of town for a little bit. And what was probably one of the worst storylines involving my character. And you're going to go to prison tonight, right? Like, that's basically what it is. You're going to go to prison for the rest of your life. Punchline tries to fight back. And the first thing Nightwing says is, you're not up against someone who forgot a lifetime of training, right? Like, you're up against me. And literally just like this fight ends like that. It ends like quick, fast, and in a hurry. She calls in a whole bunch of clowns. Nightwing ends up calling in the Bat family. Everything's over pretty fast, right? Like, it all gets wrapped up pretty quickly. And so you end up switching back over to Barbara Gordon, right? To Oracle, who basically hits up Batman and says, hey, look, and I guess his device is working now, right? But he's like, we basically got the city back in a state of array, right? Like, we got everything back to the way it's supposed to be. Like, for the most part, the clowns are neutralized, Punchline's neutralized. We're getting law and order back into the city, right? Like, everything's starting to calm back down. And that's when you kind of have this funny thing where the Joker's like, but you can't win. Like, Batman tells the Joker, like we've already taken back the city, you're not going to get your war. And the Joker's response was like, don't you get it? Like, you missed the war, right? Like, I already won. You have to be smart enough to have figured that out already, right? Like, I've already won. I've already taken the day. We're in the aftermath here, right? This war has been over for quite some time. And he says, you have to understand, whatever future that you dreamed of Gotham City being, it's a future that you're never going to get. Gotham City is a sick place, a twisted place, right? It's messed up. Nobody here is good. There's no inherently good people in the city of Gotham. It's not the way that it works. The city's tired of you. It's tired of the fact that you failed them. Like, it's tired of everything that you represent, right? Like, you are not a citizen of Gotham, Batman, despite the fact that you would want to believe you're not one of them. You're a rich guy. You're one of the richest men in the world, and you live in a mansion outside the city limits. How are you part of Gotham City, right? It's interesting because it's like, it reminds me of that scene from Batman Begins, right? Where they have that moment when you have, God, what was his name? It was Tom Wilkinson who played the mob boss guy, but like Bruce Wayne goes walking into like his little, bar area or whatever it is, and like starts spouting off about how like he's gonna go to jail and all that kind of stuff, and Tom Wilkinson's like, he's like pointing around, he's saying like, there's all these different things here, there's a congressman and a judge and yada, 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 and that's power you can't buy. But he says like, you think because your mommy and your daddy got shot that you really understand what the darker side of life is? It's like, you don't understand the darker side of life. You're Bruce Wayne. You're the Prince of Gotham. You'd have to drive 1,000 miles to find somebody who doesn't know your name. Like, you've never tasted desperate. You've never tasted suffering. You've never really known poverty. Like, you've never really known any of those things. You think you have, but you haven't. You've known somewhat those things, right? And it's a good point, because that really is Bruce Wayne, right? Bruce Wayne is trying to relate to people he could never really relate to. He doesn't know desperate. He doesn't know suffering, right? He doesn't know hopelessness. Like, he knows I can always come out on top, and that's kind of the nature of things. Is the Joker looks at it and says like, you tried to pretend that Gotham City is a nice place, but it's an angry city, right? It's a hungry city. It's a dangerous city. And he says, with everything that I've done here, now people look at Wayne Enterprises, they don't see them as a place that's here to help them. They see it as a place that stands against them. That it's the same sort of corrupt corporate enterprise that exists out there in so many other companies, because it is. All it took was a little bit of money, and suddenly the wheels of Wayne Enterprises just came to a screeching halt. All it took was a little bit of money in the city of Gotham, and look how quickly those politicians and those judges and so on sucked it all up, right? Just a little bit of money was able to bring this whole city to a standstill. Just imagine that. Like, nobody has any faith in anything anymore. And why should they? Why should they have faith in you? Why should they have faith in Gotham City? Why should they have faith in any of that, right? Like, a little bit of money brought this whole city to its knees. And despite all the politicians' claims of, I'm here for the working man, and I'm here for you, and I'm here for you, and so on and so forth, and despite all your best efforts to say like, you're here for the average Gothamite, one, you're not really a Gothamite because you don't see yourself as part of Gotham because you live outside of Gotham. And then two, nobody trusts those politicians anymore, because at the first chance they got, they turn their back on people for money, right? Like, nobody has any faith in anybody, in anything anymore. Nobody has any faith in the city of Gotham. They don't have any faith in you. They don't have any faith in anything, right? They're just kind of making it through this world and doing things, and then whatever happens, happens. And it makes sense, right? It's a reasonable expectation to have. In the face of all of this, in the face of like all that struggle and all that suffering, why wouldn't you just give up? It makes the most sense. It's the most practical thing to do. The funny thing about this is that in the midst of Joker's great big huge rant, his great big huge tirade, Harley Quinn pops up, right? Busts a shot through Joker's eye, so basically shoots him in the eye, and it's just kind of like, I used your face as target practice for a long time. But the funny thing is, you remember the agreement that Harley Quinn made with Batman. If you get in there and it looks like you're starting to lose, I'm gonna take over. And that's exactly what she does. She brings in these bombs that she had brought from Belle Reve, and she basically puts one on her ties one to her chest, and she ties one to the Joker, and then she tells Batman, you're gonna have to make a choice. Either you're gonna save me and let Joker die, or you're gonna let me die and you're gonna save the Joker. You gotta do one of these two things, right? But what you do will show what kind of person you are. Do you really want Gotham City to be better, or do you want Gotham City to be worse? Do you want it to be the way it's always been? Do you want this to continue to be a version of Gotham City where everything sucks and you sacrifice innocent lives because you don't believe in killing a guy who's gonna kill innocent people, right? Like, the life of one man is worth more than the lives of a few thousand people. And you know, she's like, that's the choice you have to make now, right? You're gonna have to let somebody die here. Either you let me die or you let the Joker die. But if you're not willing to do what needs to be done to make this city better, then I will try to force your hand, right? I will try to make you be the person who has to actually get off this fence and make a decision. And so she just runs, right? She just takes off running with these bombs. Batman initially says, given the technology, you know, that you have from the bat suit, you could disarm this bomb if you wanted to. And the Joker's like, that's not how it works, right? So right off the bat, Batman gives Joker an out, which shows Batman wants to save the Joker, which shows that knowing what Joker's going to do, Batman's okay with letting innocent people die, so long as he doesn't kill the Joker, right? Batman's afraid of, you know, becoming worse, you know, so on. So it's okay to let those innocent people die. Kind of after that moment, he's like, no, that's not how this works, right? Harley Quinn made the rules of this game, and the rules of this game state you either have to save her and deactivate her bomb, or you have to save me and deactivate my bomb, but you can't deactivate both. And Batman's like, okay then. And then he just walks away. He goes after Harley Quinn and just leaves Joker there. So it's like, my God, Batman, like, thank God, like, you actually made a choice, right? Like, you actually decided to kill a person. Is it a slippery slope? Not if you don't let it be. Not if you just say, like, the Joker was just that bad. There are no villains in the world as bad as the Joker. The number of innocent lives he took, the fact that he turned the entire city into a raging madhouse with his Joker toxin, everything that's happened here, he kind of deserved to die, right? So, I mean, is it a slippery slope? Am I gonna go become a guy who's just gonna kill every single criminal that I come across? No. Why? Because not all of them were as bad as Joker. Like, he was literally the worst of the worst. And so because of that, like, when he's walking away, right, I feel like I should just kind of nip that bud, that slippery slope argument, which is like the easiest argument in the world to crush. But I felt like I should just kind of crush that argument real quick. But like with Batman, like, walking away, the Joker starts getting pissed off, right? He's like, don't just walk away, man. He's like, you got to stay here. The Alfred corpse, right, falls at Joker, starts laughing maniacally. Joker starts getting pissed off. Bomb goes off, right? So then we end up picking up like a week later. This is kind of the crazy thing. We pick up a week later with Harley Quinn in the hospital, and Batman's talking to her. You know, she's like, you know, I had this weird dream with like this girl that didn't have like a funny name. She was kind of an idiot, right? And she thought she could fight, but she couldn't. And she got the upper hand on me once because, you know, like a sucker punch. And so it's kind of this little thing where she's rambling a bit, but she's like, how long have I been out? And Batman's like, you've been out for a week. And that's kind of the crazy thing, is one of the first things she thinks is like, he's really dead? Like, you really did kill the Joker, you know? And the response of Batman is no. Like, I found his bomb intact. It was deactivated. Basically, he took Batman's advice and deactivated the bomb. So Batman is the reason why the Joker got out. I mean, I guess, you know, Batman fans are like Batman, right? Like, they always find a way to support Batman. They're like, there's always a way to win. So I can guarantee in this instance, they'll say, well, Batman told Joker that he already knew that. So Batman didn't really save Joker. Joker saved himself, you know? So I'm sure Batman fans will say that. But nonetheless, Harley's kind of response is like, I'm glad he's dead, right? Like, I'm glad he's dead. I'm glad it's done, you know? And the city really kind of seems to have changed in a different way. But for Batman, he seems to have changed in a different way, right? Like, all this crap that he's gone through, right? Like, all this garbage that he's gone through, all this stuff that he's had to put up with for his whole life, seemingly, you know, like, this is his chance to become better, right? It's his chance to finally get away from that. His chance to finally move away from like all that crappiness and become the best version of himself. The question you have to ask here is it going to last? I'm afraid it won't, right? I'm really afraid that it won't. But, you know, he's basically like, I think I could be a better Batman than I was before, right? Not so harsh, not so intense, not so judgmental, I guess, you know, really more willing to listen, that kind of a thing, like a softer, gentler Batman, which really kind of begs the question, how's that going to help crime? It's like the person who doesn't believe in guns versus the person who does. If you're a person who doesn't believe in guns, it doesn't change the fact that the person standing there has a gun in your face. So you're going to do something about it, or you're just going to try to talk them down with harsh language. But nonetheless, from there, we kind of pick up with this epilogue, right? This small little moment, you know, we basically have this kind of person who's sort of looking around and basically says like, look at what a mess you've made of Gotham City, right? Like, our teachers would be so ashamed of you. This is a new character that we're getting. This person basically says like, it's time your city had a choice in its protector. The truce is over, right? It's time for Gotham to meet the Ghostmaker. So there's like another person who's showing up here in Gotham with the intention of like wrestling against Batman for the one who's going to run the show, right? It's really, really cool, which I'm excited to see. All right, what's going on, guys? This is Rob, and we are picking up with the aftermath to Joker War and this kind of start of a whole new Batman. And this is cool. If I'm being honest with you guys, I love this new direction that DC's taking Batman in. And if I'm being honest, I kind of feel like it's a long time coming, to be honest with you guys. And you guys will see what I mean by the time we get to the end of this. But initially, this kind of picks up with a bit of musing on behalf of Bruce Wayne, right? In the aftermath of everything that's gone on, it's a little bit of musing here. And he talks about how the way things used to be, right? Back in the day. And when I say back in the day, I mean for quite some time in DC Comics, really since like the introduction of Batman in the very early days, in the sense that when we had Commissioner Gordon, when we had the introduction of the Bat Signal, when you had Alfred, that things kind of followed this pattern, that Bruce Wayne would begin his night, as Batman, he'd put on his cloak and cowl, he'd go out into the city, and then like the Bat Signal might come up, right? And that was just kind of an indicator of, hey, things are popping off, come and see me. Commissioner Gordon would say that, come and see me and I'll kind of give you the skinny on what's happening throughout Gotham as a whole. Now, once Bruce Wayne was given this rundown, it'd be left to him to decide which one needed the most attention, basically, right? And once he narrowed that down, he'd kind of investigate the various clues. Sometimes he would do this with Robin, other times he would do it by himself. He'd have Alfred in his ear, kind of giving him some advice and as an outside perspective. He'd get back to the Batcave. Alfred would basically push him to eat or drink something, but Batman would always have this idea of, if I stay here and investigate long enough, I can kind of put the clues together and I can solve this case. And that was the form and function by which everything in Gotham City worked. And then seemingly over the course of a single night, or over the course of an exceedingly short period of time, all that went away. Alfred died, Commissioner Gordon's out of the picture, the Joker who managed to successfully take over Gotham City, Batman's lost pretty much all of his resources, right? It's kind of just him. And a lot of this discussion that he has really comes from Selina Kyle. And that's when she's kind of like, I can see that look on your face, it drives me insane, I hate it. It's that you've made a decision and it's going to change both of our lives. And it's the right decision to make, but you know that it's going to suck in terms of this decision. And my initial thought was, Batman's calling it off, right? He's basically telling Selina, like, we're no longer together anymore. The reality of this is he basically kind of says, Joker was right. I've been doing this all wrong for a very long time. And that's true, right? Batman's been doing this wrong for a very, very lengthy amount of time, right? And the reason why this kind of comes out picks up about a week ago. And we basically end up picking up with Grifter. And now the reality is that Grifter's a character I don't really know a whole lot about. I know enough to know that he comes from the Wildstorm imprint, which was created by Jim Lee and Brandon Choi back in the day, back in the 90s. And he was part of a group called International Operations, I think it was, kind of like an espionage spy team. Wildstorm was largely its own universe. It was just kind of out there doing its own thing. In the aftermath of Flashpoint and the launch of the New 52, Wildstorm became part of the main DC line of comics, but that's really all I know about Grifter. And honestly, I don't really care that much to know anything more about him. He's not interesting to me. I don't really care much about his character. For the long and short of it, for the sake of this video, since this channel really is designed to educate you guys, the nature of Grifter is such that he has powers insofar as telekinetic abilities. He's exceedingly fast. He's a great con artist, right? He was a member of the U.S. military special ops team or group or whatever you want to call it before he deserted and became a con man effectively. He was at one point involved with a group of aliens called Demonites. I'm not 100% sure how to pronounce that. They basically tried to possess him to take over his physical form. He ended up escaping. And then for the most part, he's just kind of been somewhat of a wanderer, I think, and really more of just kind of like a hired gun, like a mercenary. But in this particular instance here, he's basically working as a bodyguard for Lucius Fox. Right now, Batman's aware of who Grifter is. The fight between them is really interesting. And if anything, I think it's really one of these attempts by DC to say, hey guys, like, look at this guy Grifter, he's pretty interesting. I don't think anybody's really buying it, but he's capable enough to where he can kind of fight Batman to a standstill, but he's basically been hired as a bodyguard by Lucius Fox. And the reason for this is as part of the holdover with regards to Joker War, Lucius Fox is still the person in possession of Batman's wealth, right, of Bruce Wayne's wealth, and really kind of the guy running Wayne Enterprises. Now, in the videos that we do, where we do like a character explanation or team explanation or something like that, we'll talk about stories that happen over the course of a character's publication history that basically changes things up, that kind of initiates a huge status quo. That's what this is, right? This is a massive status quo change for Batman. And so you guys are literally reading history in real time in this particular instance, right? For those of you guys who bought the book, who are reading it right now, you're reading through history, like a huge history change in real time. How long it lasts, we don't really know. But the idea behind this is that with Lucius Fox more or less kind of running the show here, effectively being a billionaire, there's a few things going on. The first is that he still harbors some ill will towards Batman in the sense that everything that happened with Joker War, the way that he was infected by Joker toxin and all that kind of stuff, the experience has left him largely with some measure of PTSD, army. Now, the other part of that is we kind of get this indication that Punchline is still around, that she's kind of out there talking to the press and things like that. That was DC teasing us with an idea of Punchline's miniseries or maybe her ongoing series, I'm not really sure. But the other part of that is you still have Clown Hunter. And Clown Hunter is still basically going through tracking down members who are part of Joker's gang and then taking them out where he finds them. Now, the reason why this matters is because in the aftermath of Joker War, in the fall of the Joker, those individuals who were part of his army vanished because their leader was effectively gone and their chance of success, right? Their chance of kind of having the world as they wanted it to be actually coming to fruition was gone, right? So it was basically, you guys lost. And in that instance, in that case, they basically took off and they backed down, right? They ended up basically kind of going underground. And that's an important distinction to understand here. There's a difference between quitting and just going to a place where you can't be detected. And that's basically what was happening here. For the Joker's army, in terms of putting on the mask and going out every night and doing things, that's over, right? They don't really do that anymore. Instead, they meet underground. They meet in places that are not easily found and then plot or plan accordingly. Now, the Joker's still out there, and as far as we're aware, the Joker doesn't really have any involvement with his own gang because, as we know as the reader, the Joker doesn't really care about those guys. They believe the Joker cares, and they hope the Joker cares, but the Joker doesn't really care about them. They were cannon fodder, right? They were a means to achieve an end. Now, whether or not they were intelligent enough to realize that is a wholly different beast. And in times of desperation, people believe what they want to believe. And what ended up happening here is you had people who wanted things to be a certain way. The Joker represented that way, and ultimately, they kind of tied the two together of their own volition. The Joker saying things I like, and the Joker is espousing ideologies I agree with, therefore, the Joker agrees with me. The Joker likes me. And the result of that is they ended up kind of becoming the people that they were becoming. Now, the Joker basically kind of falling, Joker having been defeated, or at the very least his scheme ending, kind of puts them in a position to where it's, well, the Joker's still out there, the Joker will save us. I'm kind of making some assumptions here, but it's interesting. It basically means the Joker's army is not wholly dead, albeit very much, much smaller than it used to be. But the long and short of this is that there are some major things going on with Bruce Wayne, and especially Wayne Enterprises and Lucius Fox. That Lucius Fox, to a degree, kind of enjoys the idea of having all this wealth. He goes as far as to say, I'm not going to lie to you and say that, like, it's fine, that I don't want this money, it doesn't benefit me. It does. It benefits me, it benefits my family. That's the truth of the matter, right? Having these funds at my disposal. But understand that Wayne Enterprises is looking to force you out, right? Like, you are a member of the board, but they're looking to basically give you like a huge chunk of change, let you just kind of draw income seemingly for the rest of your life, and then you go away, right? You basically end up stepping down from Wayne Enterprises as part of the board. You have no decision-making ability anymore. More so than that, the reason why is because the heat's onto you, right? The government is looking at you. One of the big things that came out of Joker War was how Bruce Wayne was spending his money, offshore accounts, different things like that. And so the IRS and the financial sector of the federal government, right? So seemingly the Secret Service, if there's any indication of fraud on a massive level being invoked, they're looking into Bruce Wayne. And so the more he's in the public eye, the more heat and scrutiny he draws onto Wayne Enterprises. And so it's best for business that Bruce Wayne stepped down. And that's one of the big reasons why Lucius Fox is kind of holding on to this money. The other part of that is that the notion that the public perception out there that Bruce Wayne is a person who was potentially engaging in embezzlement, or at the very least tax fraud, right? Like, or even just dodging taxes, is not good for the public, for public perception of Wayne Enterprises. And so one of the other reasons why they want him to step down is so that they can rebrand, right? They can rebrand Wayne Enterprises, right? All new, all different Wayne Enterprises or something like that. Hopefully not as bad as what Marvel did in the aftermath of Secret Wars. But the whole point behind that is they're looking to literally distance themselves from Bruce Wayne. And so the important thing behind this, and the reason why this matters, is that Bruce Wayne cannot operate as Batman the way he's done in the past, which is to say, with a unlimited checkbook and all the high-tech gadgetry in the world. That at the end, Batman's gonna have to operate on the most basic level. There's no high-tech gadgetry, there's no super advanced Batmobiles with all the resources in the world that just come off of some endless supply chain. It doesn't work that way anymore. That he's got a Batmobile. If the Batmobile breaks down, he's got to fix it. Now, there's a couple reasons for why this is happening. The first is because at this point, it's obvious DC's bringing Batman comics more in line with Robert Pattinson's Batman film. The other part of this is because we've seen this happen before. The most notable instance came in 1969 during the Frank Robbins and Edmund Hamilton era with Batman number 217. And this was a point where Dick Grayson had basically left to go to college. And the result of this is that Bruce Wayne actually ended up leaving Wayne Manor and taking up residence in the city of Gotham. And the reason why that's important is because what you end up having here is this conversation between himself and Selina Kyle, where he says, that's what I want to do. Now, one of the little moments that comes out of this is really more of a plot point that'll become important later on, is that when Bruce Wayne ends up leaving Lucius Fox, right, leaving that office, he tells Grifter, like, send a message to your boss, right, and send a message to Lucius Fox, tell him I know what Halo is, and basically I'm watching. It looks like it's some kind of a little bit of an underground thing, some kind of plot point that we'll see later on down the line. But kind of picking back up with Bruce Wayne and Selina Kyle, again, he basically says, I'm gonna move into the city itself. And that's what he did in the aftermath, really with Batman 217. He ended up moving into a penthouse inside Gotham City. And that was designed more for him to be closer to the ground, to be more direct. The issue with this is that in the aftermath of that, he ended up deciding that being so close to the city was not the best idea, because it was too easy for people to pick up and distinguish the fact that Bruce Wayne was Batman, right? They were seeing him every day. People could find a way to break in, different things like that. And putting the pieces together was seemingly just too easy. So it didn't last all that long. And I would say if this does remain a mainstay for James Tynion's run, once he leaves, he'll go back to Wayne Manor, right? And then we'll probably find some way in which, Alfred comes back, probably using the Lazarus pits, who really knows. But the whole point behind this is that he basically says, like, there's a brownstone there that I own, and I didn't even realize that I owned it, so I'm simply going to move into it. I'm not going to live across the bridge. I'm going to live inside this city that I want to protect. So again, kind of reiterating what we've seen happen in years past when it came to Batman. The funny thing about this is that he had actually considered the idea of Selina Kyle kind of renaming herself, right? Like creating a new identity and her working alongside Bruce Wayne. The issue with this is that with Selina Kyle and Bruce Wayne spending time together, and then Catwoman and Batman hanging out together, people would have put the pieces together like that. They would have done it so quick, and they would have said, Bruce Wayne and Selina Kyle are hanging out all the time. Batman and Catwoman are fighting crime together all the time. Is Bruce Wayne and Selina Kyle Batman and Catwoman? Somebody somewhere would have figured that out, right? The funny thing about this, though, is that Selina Kyle had the reverse idea, that Bruce Wayne could just run off with her. Now, of course, Bruce's response is, I can't do that, and that's true, right? How's DC gonna publish Batman comics if Bruce Wayne's not Batman? It doesn't work. Nobody wants to read a Batman comic where Bruce Wayne's not Batman for like 10 years. For a short amount of time, sure, right? Like the whole aftermath of Final Crisis, where like Dick Grayson was Batman for a time and Damian Wayne was Robin, sure, that's interesting. The aftermath of Batman Nightfall, sure. But in terms of like 2030, that like Bruce Wayne is still not Batman, people don't want that. People want Bruce Wayne to be Batman forever, right? It's just kind of the way things are. It's the way comic book fans are. We do not like change. And so it's one of these things where Bruce Wayne basically, and even Selina Kyle basically say, like, we need to kind of get ourselves regrounded, right? Like we need to reground ourselves. And so what's interesting about this is like, Selina Kyle is like, we'll take 1 year, basically 1 year apart, 1 year for them to figure things out, to get them, get things grounded, to get themselves sorted out. And then at the end of that 1 year, basically reconcile, consolidate, and see whether or not they can move forward together. And so what you kind of end up getting is them basically going to the brownstone of Bruce Wayne and knocking boots, right? I mean, there's no furniture in there. But Selina Kyle's like, who needs furniture? But nonetheless, it's interesting. This is a whole new Batman, right? It's DC taking Batman back to the way he was back during the 60s and the 70s, where he had some semblance of high-tech gadgetry, but Batman comics were largely relying on Bruce Wayne's intuition, right? His intelligence, his detective skills, and some measure of super advanced gadgetry. But in recent years, I would say Batman comics have largely focused and shifted their focus to like Bruce Wayne being able to achieve his goals using like super high-tech stuff. And I'm excited to read comics where it's just Batman and his intellect. I'm excited to read that. It's a throwback to the Batman comics of yesteryear, and I'm looking forward to it a lot. So with that being said, guys, we're gonna bring this video to an end. If you are new here to Comics Explained, make sure you guys hit the sub button to become part of the Rob Corps. If you guys enjoyed this video, make sure you drop a like. I will catch you all later. Peace.